The hero of this story is called Kyle, and when he wakes up in an unfamiliar room, he grabs the maid by the arm to find out what is going on. He demands to know who she is and why she's in his room. The young maid fearfully reveals her name and reminds him that he had once saved her. Then she apologizes for entering his room without permission, as she didn't realize that he was sleeping. Kyle only grips her hand harder as he repeats the name in confusion, causing her to let out a yelp of pain. It seems like he had gone a little bit too far, and that pushes him out of his sudden anger at her. He releases her hand and apologizes for his sudden outburst, and thankfully she's still alright despite the pain in her hand. Kyle seems to be in a daze after waking up, as he shakily glances around his messy room. What on earth is going on, and why is this kid in a maid outfit? He notices the medicine and meal on the countertop and asks about it. Ursil confirms that it is his medicine and meal for the day. However, his porridge has gone cold, so she would need to go warm it up and bring it back for him. With that, she leaves, and Kyle is only more confused about the whole situation. Did she say that was his medicine? And when the world happened to his body? He carefully steps down from the bed and walks to the nearest mirror to look at himself. For the first time, this is the face of a video game character. Not him. The one inside the body of Kyle Saltarian was not Kyle at all. He ruffled his hair in panic as he stared in the mirror. Lee Hyun-woo, a popular game streamer from another world, had somehow teleported into the body of a character from a game he often played, named Fantasy Defense. At that moment, he realized that he had somehow woken up in another world. The character, Kyle Saltarian, is a video game NPC that appears in his favorite game. He is the youngest son of the Saltarian Marquis family, which is known for their swordsmanship. As one of the characters from the Saltarian family, he was involved in many early game events. In events where he interacts with the protagonist of the story, he always gets properly beaten, and he's usually defeated in a single blow by a minion-level monster, summoned by a villain in summary. He's not even part of the main cast of NPC characters. He's an absolute extra role. That kind of character is who Lee Hyun-woo had awoken, as he decides to test if he's dreaming by pinching himself in the cheek. The immediate pain and the red bump on his face afterward proves that he in fact is not dreaming. This was all real now that he is sure that this is reality and not some sort of twisted dream. He continues to stare at himself in the mirror in exasperation. How could this have happened to him? Lee Hyun-woo, who was once the #1 player in the Fantasy Defense World Rankings, has now become an insignificant and worthless character. Fantasy Defense is a virtual reality game that will become a hit globally by 2030 thanks to its devilishly difficult levels. No one had cleared it even after 10 years of it being released. On top of that, it was devilishly fun, and its addictiveness continued to grow its popularity. In the game, there were scores assigned based on gameplay, style, and quest achievement on a global ranking scale. The scores rise significantly when rare quests are completed or rare items are obtained, and the person who stood on top of it all, after investing 10 years of his life into the game, was Lee Hyun-woo, the most popular streamer for the game. He knew rare magic circles and legendary combination formulas that others did. He was truly the living dictionary of the game, and he had overwhelming scores that no one could ever hope to beat. And for someone so great to be possessed by such a weak and useless character can only be a cruel twist of fate. This is a game where even the protagonist, with exceptional talents, can't clear the higher levels. So how is he supposed to survive more than that, since he has replayed this game so many times? At this point, he already knows the fate of Kyle Saltarian very clearly. The ultimate goal of Fantasy Defense is to stop the forces of darkness. The one who summoned those dark forces was Adolf, the second son of the Saltarian Marquis family. The second son was aiming for the position of head of the Saltarian family, and he hoped to use dark powers to incite a rebellion. In the end, the entire Saltarian estate falls into ruin and becomes a base for the dark forces that have been eyeing human territory for a long time. In the midst of all this chaos, Kyle Saltarian, who was completely powerless, was slaughtered mercilessly by those same forces. Maybe if he just leaves the estate before the rebellion even breaks out, that would be enough to keep him alive. That's just a temporary solution, though. And the real problem lies elsewhere. This new noble body of his is suffering from a disease called Hermum. It's a disease that blocks the mana pathways in the body. In this world, mana is the source of aura and magic, which are both essential for survival. Mana is as important as blood in the body, and those affected by Hermum have blocked the pathways in their body, which means that they fail to receive the nutrients needed for survival and growth. That typically means that they die before the age of 20. The only treatment for MEM is to absorb the mana from the natural environment in order to overcome the disease. However, since the pathways are blocked, they cannot accept mana, And this term MEM is pretty much the same as having a terminal illness. Kyle Seltzerian was diagnosed with his terminal illness at a young age, and he's been filled with despair ever since. The fear of death, the anxiety, and the despair over the limited time he has left loomed over him like a shadow. And because of that, his personality became twisted. Before he knew it, he became a disgrace to his family, and his father ordered him to stay in his room and reflect on his actions there. He continued to boil in rage at the thought that his family thought he was a joke and someone who could easily be taken advantage of. His anger at the world and at everyone in it grew and grew until he eventually died. In other words, the guy was hopeless even in the game. It was always clear that he was a hopeless character, even though he was a terminally ill patient. His horrible personality is the main trigger for people to give up on him. To summarize the situation, our boy now has possessed an incredibly hopeless character who has no talent or ability for either swordsmanship or magic. No lifespan, left a terrible personality, an awful reputation, and to top it all off, he is confined to his room by the head of the family. This is like starting nightmare mode on a new RPG game. From the start, he is already ruined. Whether he stays put in his room or tries to escape, the inevitable ending for him is death. How is he even supposed to survive in this world with those kinds of stats? Isn't it normal to get at least 1 or 2 cheat skills when you get reincarnated? It would be better if he at least had some kind of status window or something similar as he contemplates what led him to this situation. Bright blue orbs begin to shine around him. Just a moment ago, there was nothing like this in the area. Just where did this come from? The young noble reaches out carefully and touches the orb, which causes a burst of light to shoot out from his hand. Once it clears, a status window with a few key messages appears in front of him. He had awakened, and because of that, he will now receive 2 new talents, which include access to a status window and the mind's eye ability, which will be activated automatically from now on, as if it were summoned by him. The status window appears right in front of his eyes and shows the current stats of his new body. He has 2 new talents called Mana Pathways and Mind's Eye. What could Mana Pathways be, though? Well, for starters, Mind's Eye allows you to see the detailed specs of people and equipment around you. Mana Pathways, however, is a completely new talent that he had never heard of before. Judging from the name, it seems to be related to magic in some way. But magic talents are supposed to be under the Mana Companion talent, even though he has never seen this talent before. His gamer intuition tells him that this talent is somehow superior to Mana Companion, and it might even be a top-tier talent. When he had the Mana Companion ability, he was never able to see anything like the orbs around him. With his own eyes, this is pure mana, energy itself. And if his guess is correct, he should be able to absorb it for himself. The noble reaches out his hand and touches one of the pure mana bubbles in front of him. Immediately he does. He starts to feel the mana flowing through his body. It moves through his arm until it stops abruptly. It seems like this is one of the symptoms of the Herrmann disease. The blocked pathway stops the mana from fully going through his entire body. He was so close to feeling mana flowing through his body, and this was not going to stop him. Through sheer will alone, he starts to force the mana to move through the blockage. By force through his command, he wills the mana to pierce through the blockage and force its way into the rest of his body. He makes the mana as sharp as a needle, then pushes it against the blockage, slowly pushing through, until finally he starts to feel the mana flowing through his body. It's only up to his elbows for now, but if he continues to gather mana like this, and push through each blockage the way he just did, then he'd be able to overcome her Mimyu as well. Thanks to that, he will not die, and there will be hope for him after all. Back in the kitchen, Ursil has finished warming up her master's porridge. She has to hurry up and bring it back to him before it gets cold again. As she prepares to carry the food back up to meet him, a group of maids walks up to confront her. They tell her not to give that food to Kyle and stand blocking the door to the kitchen. Ursil looks at them a bit confused as the maids continue to explain that as a protest to Lord Kyle's misdeeds against the maids, they have come together and decided to temporarily stop serving him. If he goes hungry for a few days, then maybe he will change his mind and his attitude towards them. So they order her to put the food down and comply with them. Ursula, on the other hand, can't be bothered with their protest. She tells them to do whatever they want to do, while she continues to do her work. That response doesn't go well with the maids at all. One of them yells at her in anger to at least pretend to be nice. With that, she slaps the meal tray out of her hands and onto the floor. She asks if the young maid still thinks that she's some kind of mobile. She came from a ruined family and was sold into slavery. So how dare she talk back to her fellow maid? Ursil ignores her yelling, while the other maid holds the angered one back. The young maid couldn't care less about the ramblings of her co-workers as she continued to clean the spilled food off the floor. That only angers the woman more, and she raises a hand to slap the child, who is kneeling on the ground to clean up the mess. Just then, The door swings open and a blonde-haired man walks into the room. The angry maid's hand freezes in midair. Everyone is shocked by Mr. Leon Hart's presence in the kitchen, as he angrily demands to know just what exactly is going on in here. The other two only look at him in shock, as he passes them to look at the mess on the floor, and the younger girl struggling to clean it up. He sighs once he realizes that these two are just giving the young girl a hard time. The meal for Lord Kyle is already late, and she needs to hurry up and prepare another one to bring to him. Ursil accepts and leaves to go prepare another plate of food, while the two maids stand shyly to the side. Leon Hart turns angrily to them once she leaves, and it's clear that he's not impressed by what he just saw. Meanwhile, Kyle continues to look through his new abilities in the status menu. If he were to utilize Mind's eye and mana pathways together, then it might even change the fate of the Marquis household, which was doomed for a gruesome downfall. He's been playing this game for 10 years at this point, and he has an advanced foresight level of information. Moreover, he was born with the great power and wealth of a nobleman. With all these things on his side, then it might actually be possible to stop the forces of darkness from taking over. It seems like there are big things ahead of him. But first, he has to overcome his Hermamo by opening the mana passages and learning magic. Mana Delay, for instance, is a talent specialized in magic. With his new talent from magic, it would be better for him to become a wizard than a knight. The second thing he has to do is prevent the downfall of the Marquis family. Since he's part of this family, if the family does well, then so will he. The Marquis of Celtrian will be a very solid support in terms of reputation, skill, wealth, and everything he could possibly ask for. Since the territory is located in the outskirts, he doesn't have to worry about the situation in the capital. Finally, and the most important thing, he has to gather talented allies in order to prepare for the massive darkness attack that he expects to happen in the near future. If he were to select a potentially talented person and make them his allies, then they would give him stronger power in return. That is how he's going to build his strength. However, firstly, in order to gather talent, he needs to look around for someone close by. Since he is the Marquis of Celta Leon, then he would have to start with Leon Hart, who was once a useful tank NPC while he played the game. As he continues to think about what he will do, a girl's voice calls out to him from the door. It's Ursil, who has returned with the food she went to prepare for him. His eyes widen as he sees her, and he realizes that this is the kid that came into his room earlier. Although he can't seem to remember her name, she silently walks back to his counter to prepare his food and medicine. While he struggles to remember, suddenly, the status window pops up with exactly the information he needs. It classifies her as a low-ranking enemy and shows detailed information about her stats and her talents. Her characteristics are being cold-hearted and hardworking, but it's her talent that catches his eye. She has a talent called the Spirit's Eternal Friend. That's the highest level talent in the Spirit Magic category. He continues to stare at her stats until she turns to look at him and realizes that he has also been staring at her. She nervously tells him to enjoy his meal before stepping back to allow him to eat. Kyle watches her intently and wonders why someone with the talent to become a genius psychic is working so hard as a maid. Well, the answer to that happened a year ago at an auction. The auctioneer proudly introduces today's special item. As Kyle sits in the crowd bitterly, she points the spotlight at a young girl who stands silently on stage. It's Ursil, and she's revealed to be the daughter of Baron Helam, who was recently stripped of his title because she comes from a noble family. She's polite and smart, and the crowd is clearly interested in her. Thanks to that, as soon as the bids start, people begin to yell out their prices for the young girl. Sir Leon Hart, who is seated beside Kyle, suggests that they leave the auction, since they should not stand for things like slave trade. Kyle, however, instead stands up and places a high bid of 300 gold. The price is so insane that the auctioneer stutters for a moment as he hears it. The knight beside him calls out to him in shock for even thinking of buying a slave, but the young noble shuts him up with a word he will spend his money however he wants to. In his mind, his actions don't matter, since his own father doesn't even care what he's doing. Then, with the crowd completely silent from his high bid, he walks over to the girl, who looks at him with a blank expression on her face, while her hands are shackled. He tells her that from now on, she belongs to him now that he had bought Ursil. He took her outside and released her shackles, with that she was free to do whatever she wanted. He sets her free and tells her that she's no longer a slave. Now that he has bought her freedom, Kyle turns to leave with Sir Leon Hart by his side, but the girl calls out to him again. She thinks about it for a moment. Now that she had her freedom, she could go wherever she wanted. But since he said that he owns her, she wants to go with him. Kyle scoffs and tells her to do whatever she wishes. Back in the present, Hyun-woo realizes that he has just gotten a glimpse into Kyle's memories. With that, he understands how the young maid had gotten into the Marquis' household. Her seal had been sold at an auction, and Kyle had bought her in order to set her free. She must have been through so much at such a young age. Either way, the fact that he also has Kyle's memories shows that he had completely merged with him. He can even feel the emotions Kyle had toward Ursula at the time, a sense of solidarity from both of them, sharing a fate that they didn't choose, as well as their mutual feelings of being abandoned in the world alone. Those were what pushed Kyle to do what he did and buy her. He decides to stop thinking too much, so he can enjoy the food in front of him. He takes the first bite, and his eyes sparkle in joy. The meal was delicious. He asks Ursil if she is the one who made this herself. The girl shakily replies that she was the one who had made the porridge. It seems like she's still shy about it, especially since she knows how he can get when he's angry at something or someone. But to her surprise, he instead compliments her on being a good cook and asks her to make the same dish for him again next time. Ursula is momentarily shocked by this and looks away shyly. A status menu opens up over her head and shows that her affection has gone up to 35, thanks to his compliment, even though she had a bit of affection. Considering the dramatic encounter they had previously, her affection wasn't that high. It's not very surprising, though, since she must have witnessed all of Kyle's delinquent behavior. The fact that she had any affection for him at all was a miracle. In itself, in the game he used to play, there was no spirit summoner named Ursil. That means that in the main game storyline, she was never able to fully develop her abilities as a spirit summoner, and instead, she got caught up in the internal rebellion of the Marquis household, where she lost her life this time. He wasn't going to let that happen. There is no way he would let such a gem slip away, especially while she's right in front of him. He decides to start working head-on. He asks her if she has ever thought about learning spirit summon. She looks at him, confused about why he suddenly wants her to learn such a thing. The young noble says he wants her to learn it because he thinks she has a talent for it. She, on the other hand, has never imagined herself as having any talent for spirit summon. That's probably because she hasn't been exposed to spirit summon. Even in her former household, spirit summoning is known to be particularly expensive to teach and learn. So for a lower, noble family, the cost of education would be a huge burden for them. That just means that he now needs to take matters into his own hands. He tells her that she's going to start learning spirit summon, and she doesn't have a choice. After all, she belongs to him. Ursil takes a gulp of saliva and looks away shyly as another notification window appears above her head and her affection increases to 50%. A few days later, Kyle leaves his room and comes face to face with Sir Leon Hart. They stare each other down intently before the snow-haired noble asks the knight to let him through. Sir Leon Hart declines immediately, which only further upsets Kyle. He has been stuck in that room for way too long, and there's a way he was going to stay in that room for the rest of his life. Sir Leon Hart firmly tells him that he cannot leave until his father gives permission, especially after what had happened and the Lord's last words to him. Kyle freezes for a second, and his mind wanders over all the arguments the Lord has had with him. The whole reason the room arrest rules were there was because they could no longer tolerate his constant troublemaking. But the more time he wastes here, the less time he has to get the mana particles. They're floating around deeper within the house. Ever since he discovered that he could unblock the mana pathways by using the mana orbs that appear around his room, he has been absorbing all the particles that appear in his room. Every day, although it wasn't enough to unblock the pathways instantly, mana has been accumulating in his body, like experience points in a game, and his body gradually improved over time. But it is nowhere near enough to cure the Hermama disease. To get more, he needed to leave his room and go outside to gather more mana. The young noble promises that he won't go very far, and he'll just walk in the forest nearby so he can exercise. The word exercise surprises Sir Leon Hart, who has never heard such a constructive reason from Kyle. That gets Kyle a bit upset, but Sir Leon Hart continues, saying that he has been tasked as the noble's personal knight for years. But this was the first time that he had ever heard him say something like that. It was at that moment that Kyle realized just how much of a delinquent he had been. Up until then, he had absolutely no credibility. Even with that, however, Leon Hart seemed to be some kind of unyielding wall. This man was tasked to be Kyle's personal guard. But originally, he was a famous character in the game who was known to have a large amount of both defense and offense. He's highly skilled and has great potential, which means he could be raised up to the rank of captain. However, most players simply made him serve as a tank in their parties. Furthermore, due to his high loyalty and unbreakable trust, he was one of the most popular companion characters among players. In the original game, he becomes a wandering knight after the fall of the Marquis household, which allowed people to recruit him through events. For now, though, since the Second Son's rebellion hadn't happened yet, he was still in the Sultarian mansion, working as Kyle's personal knight. It was such a waste to task such a promising talent like him with babysitting duty. Just what exactly were the Soltarian Knights doing? Why on earth would they stick him in a dead-end place like this? He accidentally said that last part out loud, and Leon Hart takes offense after misunderstanding his words, as the delinquent is dissatisfied with him as a guard. The younger boy tries to explain that he's not dissatisfied with him, but Leon Hart instead just advises him to follow the orders of the Lord. His father, that's when Kyle realizes that the knight's loyalties don't lie with him. They lie with Lord Rempton Soltarian. His father, that was only natural. After all, who would want to stick with the delinquent younger son? He just can't accept that. Though his next talent recruiting project starts with Sir Leon Hart, he asks the knight if he would be willing to try to persuade his father. The blonde man realizes that something has changed about Kyle's demeanor. Little does he know that in actuality, he has caught the interest of a younger lord, and now the kid is determined to win his loyalty. He pushes a bit harder and asks if the knight will help him. Leon Hart isn't convinced, however. Here's something different about him somehow, but he just can't place his finger on it. He asks Kyle what he's scheming by acting so differently. That shows just how much he doesn't trust the delinquent. The kid has just been in his room for so long that his thoughts have changed. From now on, he has decided that he wants to live a long life. That shocks Leon Hart, who knows exactly why someone like Kyle can't live a long life. The white-haired boy is someone who had to give up everything because of his incur, the cruel curse of the Hermamu disease. For one such as him to yearn for a long life was a true tragedy, especially when fate had decreed he was unlikely to witness his 20th year. It was a bitter pill to swallow. He possessed not a shred of magical talent, nor was he blessed with any particular gift for the blade. And as the youngest son, the line of succession was a door forever closed to him. Yet despite all these failings, Lord Rempton made the curious choice to station this knight by the boy's side. The elder nobleman had once questioned Leon Hart, asking if he harbored resentment for this peculiar assignment, a post that had effectively halted his entire career path. The knight's response was immediate. It would be an unimaginable honor for a mere member of the Soltarian Knight Order to guard a direct heir of the legendary Marquis family. As a man of unwavering loyalty, he intended to execute his sacred duty. It was precisely because of this unbending character that Lord Rempton demanded he remain at young Kyle's side within the treacherous Marquis estate. There existed no other soul who could be entrusted with his protection. No one, save for the steadfast and devoted Leon Hart. With this conviction, the old lord tasked him with the monumental duty of watching over the house's heir, a command the knight vowed to uphold until his final breath. Even now, as the boy relentlessly badgers him for a chance to venture outside to exercise, he persisted with his pleas to be let out, even proposing that the blonde knight informed the lord he merely wished for some simple exercise. Leon Hart placed a firm hand on his shoulder, halting any further movement. There was no need for him to venture outside for physical training. Such activities could easily be conducted within the safety of his room. With his options dwindling, Kyle resolved to employ a more forceful tactic. He warned Leon Hart to step aside, making it clear he would not ask again. His objective was simple: get outside and locate more mana cores, so he could continue the vital work of unblocking his mana circuits. He fixed Leon Hart with an intense, meaningful glare, and Leon Hart felt a bizarre, powerful aura emanate from the boy. Once more, he was struck by this strange sensation, the undeniable feeling that something about Lord Kyle was profoundly different. But even with this doubt, his duty forced him to hold his ground. It mattered not how much the young lord had transformed overnight. He took a challenging step forward, planting himself confidently before the child. The Marquis's command, he declared, was absolute, and that divine order applied to the young lord as well. However, if he truly desired to step foot outside, then he would first have to find a way past him. And in an instant, Kyle was struck by a crushing wave of killing intent flowing from the knight. It was an absurdly unfair tactic for Leon Hart to unleash his killing aura on a child, all over a simple request to walk in the garden. Had he been any ordinary 13-year-old, he would have buckled in terror and collapsed right there on the floor. But luckily for the knight, Kyle was far from an ordinary 13-year-old. He smirked, completely unfazed by the overwhelming pressure emanating from the knight. And with utter calm, he strode past him and tapped him on the shoulder. The move left Leon Hart utterly stunned. He stood there, motionless, as the child simply walked by him. This meant, of course, that the knight had to honor his word. They stepped out into the tranquil evening air. The very first thing Kyle noticed was how crisp and invigorating the atmosphere felt. An eternity had passed since he was last permitted to be outdoors. He took a precious moment to stretch his limbs and feel the cool air upon his skin. Even though this garden was not far from his suffocating room, he still felt an incredible sense of liberation as he gazed up at the breathtaking tapestry of the night sky. And more than anything else, he was electrified by the sheer density of mana particles that permeated the air. Now that he had been granted this opportunity, he was going to absorb every last one of them. The young lord dashed excitedly around the garden, attempting to gather as many mana cores as he possibly could. Meanwhile, Leon Hart observed this scene from a knight's point of view. He was frolicking about like a child set loose in a candy store, and it served as a stark reminder that Lord Kyle was, in fact, still a boy. At the end of it all, he never imagined the young lord could find such joy just from stepping outside, but he was still a child. The fact he could walk through the nights, killing intent so effortlessly, that should have been an impossible feat, especially considering Lord Kyle had never been trained in mana or aura. He simply shouldn't have been able to withstand that level of pressure. Leon Hart remained completely lost in his thoughts and failed to notice Kyle glancing back in his direction. It was quite clear that he was still shaken by what had just transpired, and he had every single reason to be utterly astonished. The explanation for why Kyle could endure Leon Hart's killing intent was deceptively simple. His vessel may be that of a 13-year-old noble boy, one who had never experienced a true battle, but his spirit was that of a hardened veteran who had survived countless virtual wars. For 10 long years inside a virtual reality game, Fantasy Defense was renowned for its terrifyingly realistic depictions through virtual reality, and thanks to his mountain of combat experience, he had become completely desensitized to these moments of life and death. This was especially true since he had already witnessed truly horrific sights, from wading through mountains of corpses to being drenched in the blood of his enemies. A simple intimidation tactic, like a knight's killing intent, was child's play for him to overcome, not after everything he had already been through. After a bit more dedicated mana gathering, he had accumulated a sufficient amount to clear several more mana channels. Venturing outside had undeniably been the correct decision. Leon Hart then informed the young lord that he would be formally requesting punishment from a Marquis for his grave actions, despite merely following the boy's lead. It was still fundamentally wrong of him to use such a technique on someone he was sworn to protect and to serve. He then bowed his head deeply and offered his sincerest apologies to Kyle for the needless and reckless use of a powerful skill against him. Kyle glanced over at the troubled Leon Hart, then instructed him to relay his words directly to his father, that Kyle holds no desire for Leon Hart to face any punishment. The old lord was visibly shocked upon hearing that his son, Kyle, had actually expressed that he didn't want the knight to be punished. He had to ask one more time, just to confirm that it was indeed Kyle who had delivered this message to him. Kyle, he just didn't seem like the sort of person who would do such a thing. For anyone, really. He also recounted how Kyle managed to withstand his killing intent skill, a feat that no ordinary 13-year-old should ever be capable of. In truth, Leon Hart himself was still doubting what his own eyes had witnessed. For Kyle to have endured the killing aura of an expert-level knight, like him, he must have mysteriously acquired immense skill from nowhere. The Elder Lord then inquired what Kyle did afterward while in the garden. After his playful romp around the garden concluded, he settled down and entered a deep meditative state, much to Leon Hart's surprise. While he was meditating in the vast garden, he questioned the young lord as to when he had learned how to meditate. When Kyle was much younger, he briefly studied swordsmanship under his father. During that time, he was also taught the basics of meditation, but he simply lacked any natural aptitude for it, so he abandoned it quickly. Now, he wanted to attempt the practice once more, and to accomplish this, he requested that Leon Hart keep everyone away from the vicinity to ensure he wouldn't be disturbed. Following that, he remained in meditation at that very spot for a full 6 hours. The Elder Lord halted the story, completely stunned at the very notion that Kyle could possibly meditate for that duration. He meditated for an entire 6 hours, not 6 seconds. That boy truly might have changed. After all, the Duke himself had once attempted to impart the fundamentals of swordsmanship to Kyle when he was a child. He was a scion of the prestigious Saltarian family. After all, so he should at least be capable of walking the path of the sword. He also held a faint hope that the white-haired child would be the one to inherit the family's sacred sword techniques. However, that boy was completely useless. He collapsed after only a brief period of training, and whined that his legs felt as though they were about to seize up. That display had enraged the Duke. The very thought that such a weakling could be a part of his bloodline. There had never been a more pathetic descendant in his family's history. Kyle possessed absolutely no talent for swordsmanship whatsoever. On top of that weakness, he lacked both tenacity and patience. He was utterly incapable of enduring even simple training. So to learn that a person like that had meditated for 6 hours straight is simply unbelievable. Could it be that he suffered a blow to his head and it completely altered his personality? Leon Hart had already considered that possibility, and he meticulously checked to see if anything was amiss with his food. Fortunately, there were no unusual findings. Kyle's sudden transformation was a product of his own will. His entire disposition had shifted completely as of late, and it wasn't merely his attitude toward hard work that had changed. Even the very way he looked at Leon Hart had distinctly transformed as well. It appears as though he has finally begun to mature somewhat, and that development was something that greatly interested the Duke. He decided to let the matter rest without further inquiry and commands Leon Hart to continue his duty of watching over Kyle. Back within his chambers, Kyle resumed channeling his mana, pushing until his spiritual vision was greatly enhanced, and his mana began to surge and overflow. As a result of this, his eyes could now perfectly perceive the internal state of his own body. With this new power, he should be able to clear the mana pathways all the way to his heart. In a single, decisive push, he began with his arm, then drew the mana torrent into his shoulder, down his spine, and then finally all the way to his very heart. He endured the searing agony as his heart began to freeze solid. But after a long moment, he shattered the blockage in his mana pathways, freeing a direct path to his heart. Now that this incredible feat was accomplished, he should finally be able to wield magic. And he was practically vibrating with excitement to begin learning magic in earnest. In this world, to utilize magic, a mage must first construct a circle in proximity to their heart. To command higher tiers of magic, they must then increase the total number of circles they possess. And the more circles one wishes to manifest, the longer the process will take. So if an individual hoped to become a mage, they would need to commence training between the tender ages of 5 and 8. Then, by the age of 12, they should have formed at least a single circle to be considered someone with the potential to walk the path of a mage. Given that Kyle is already 13 years of age, it is considerably late for him to begin learning the ways of magic. Fortunately for him, he was not some ordinary NPC bound to follow the simple, established rules of their world. Since he possesses the mana adaptation talent, his circumstances were vastly different from a norm. All that was required of him was to construct a circle, and he should be fully capable of beginning his magical studies. But first, he needed to discover how to construct a circle in the first place. Perhaps he could manifest it in the same way he learned from the game. As he was contemplating how he should proceed, a sharp knock echoed from his door. It was Leon Hart, and he had come to deliver some incredible news. The Duke had officially lifted the restrictions on Kyle's movements. He was now permitted to leave his room and take strolls in the garden, under the single condition that Leon Hart accompany him at all times. He was still forbidden from leaving the estate, but being allowed to walk in the garden was already a monumental blessing for someone who spent every waking moment trapped within his room. It appeared that Leon Hart truly did an excellent job convincing his father, but it also seemed that his favorability had increased significantly as well. It had risen by a shocking 30 points out of absolutely nowhere. Back when he had repelled the knights, killing intent, his favorability score was at a dismal -50. Perhaps he was moved by his intense meditation session in the garden, especially given that he had meditated throughout the entire night and then collapsed from exhaustion in the morning. Leon Hart certainly seems like the type of man who's impressed by sweat and unwavering perseverance. Either way, now that his confinement had been officially lifted, there was a specific place he had been longing to visit. The estate's grand library, a place filled with all the ancient knowledge he would ever need to construct his very first magic circle. But the librarian did not appear pleased to see his face. In fact, she looked absolutely petrified. She scurried over to speak with Leon Hart in a frantic attempt to understand what was happening. Kyle had been strictly banned from entering the library a long time ago, after he had spent an entire afternoon shredding some authentic, priceless books that would cost a fortune to ever replace. He used to mock that they were just pieces of worthless paper that were useless after you pass on, even though she had struggled to acquire them by traveling all across the vast empire. After his destructive outbursts in the library, he was forbidden from ever setting foot inside it again. But it would seem that his restrictions had been finally lifted. Kyle himself felt a pang of embarrassment that he used to do such foolish things. But now his only purpose in the library was to read, not to stir up any trouble. He was looking for books specifically related to magic. That request baffled the poor librarian, since the Duke's family had always placed emphasis on the path of the sword. Their collection didn't have many books on magic. For the time being, all he desired was a tome that taught how to form magic circles. She returned with a single introductory book that looked far too complex for his personal life. There were books in here designed for 7-year-olds, but every single one of them read like a university-level thesis. Ordinarily, if this were some kind of video game, then There would be a convenient status window that would let him automatically absorb all the knowledge from each and every book. As if the universe had heard his plea, a status window appeared before him, and it informed him that he had awakened a skill known as spiritual vision. This ability allowed him to translate the low-level book that he had been struggling so desperately to read, and then transform it into simpler copies that he could absorb instantly. On top of this miraculous translation feature, he could also utilize his sharp perception skill to decode the books effortlessly and with incredible speed. He turned to Alice, the librarian, and requested more beginner-level books. He was thrilled to gain as much of this knowledge as he possibly could. Leon Hart couldn't help but wonder if it was truly acceptable to have this many books borrowed out at once. The librarian was incredibly anxious that he might damage some of them due to the sheer volume of tomes he had borrowed. Even selling her own home wouldn't cover the cost of replacing them if they happened to be lost or damaged in any way. She didn't need to fret so much about it, however, as he intended to finish them all in very short order. Or at the very least, he would surely lose interest in them halfway through. The Kyle he knew absolutely despised books, but now he was voraciously consuming as many as he could all at once. Leon Hart noticed that the books he had chosen were primarily tomes on mana, management and magic, circle manifestation. He quickly deduced that this newfound passion must be connected to his disease. He attempted to offer a small piece of advice to the young noble about how mastering magic would be exceptionally difficult, since the curse itself blocks the mana and aura flow of his body. But Kyle already understood what he was attempting to say before the knight even began to speak. Leon Hart offered to retreat if his counsel was not welcome. But that was the complete opposite of what Kyle was thinking. It was a perfectly valid point, after all. So there is absolutely no reason to become upset over it. Every single person in this house would likely say the exact same thing and view what he was doing as a complete waste of his time. But he was already the black sheep of the family, after all, and he already held a reputation as the reckless youngest son. A little bit of strangeness from him wouldn't raise an eyebrow from anyone. Besides, it's not as if reading a few books could harm anybody. At the end of the day, he was certain Leon Hart was simply concerned that he would fail spectacularly at learning magic and then spiral into a state of deep despair. But that was quite the opposite of the truth. Kyle had absolutely no intention of dying yet. He rose to his feet and strode towards the older man. Then he placed a determined, closed fist over his heart to reassure him. He was planning to do absolutely everything in his power to ensure that he survives far longer than anyone thinks he can. With that declaration, he left to find a more suitable place to lie down and finish devouring his books. Leon Hart was left utterly stunned by Kyle's abrupt personality shift. The Kyle Saltarian that he remembered was not this fiercely strong-willed in the slightest. One of his earliest memories involving the boy was a day on the sweltering training field where he knelt pathetically on the ground, crying out for his father. When Leon Hart had approached to ask what was the matter, he told him that the great Lord had declared that there was no place for a useless child like him. He used to be such a pathetic crybaby once, and now it seemed as if he was blossoming into someone truly admirable. The blonde knight grabbed another book and moved towards the boy, and that was the precise moment Kyle noticed. His affection score had leaped from a shocking -30 all the way back to 0. He had no idea why it happened so suddenly. There was nothing particularly special that he did that should cause it to jump up so abruptly. He was almost frightened as the older man drew near. But all he did was place another book on the table before turning to leave and offering to stand guard just outside his room before the stoic man had departed. There was the barest, faintest hint of a smile on his face. Kyle began to wonder if perhaps he just enjoyed seeing the younger boy read. But if that were truly the case, then why didn't his affection level shift while they were inside the library? Well, he typically appreciated seeing persistence. So maybe consuming multiple books in one go qualifies as a form of persistence, irrespective of the actual reason. Kyle simply attributed it to him being a rather peculiar man. All the while, Leon Hart stood guard outside his room with a hopeful smile gracing his face. Now that the devoted knight was gone and he was finally all alone, it was time for him to commence his reading. He activated his sharp perception skill once more and began the process of decoding all the books he had borrowed from the library. Simultaneously, as he had hoped from the skill, the decoding speed was dozens of times faster than his normal reading pace. Not only that, but he could also decipher multiple books at the same time. So it was as if he was reading every single one of them simultaneously. On top of that, any challenging parts of the decoding information were broken down into much simpler data. The knowledge from the books was also stored directly in his brain as data. The more tomes he read, the more knowledge he acquired. This then accelerated the decoding process even further, which in turn increased his comprehension. That then sped up the decoding process exponentially more, within a mere matter of minutes. Every single book in the vicinity had been fully decoded. With that task complete, it was time to put his magic to the ultimate test. The very first thing he wanted to try was manifesting a circle, utilizing the freshly decoded data. Thanks to this new knowledge, he already had a firm grasp on the basic principles of circle formation and the minimum requirements needed to construct a first circle. First, he would have to guide the mana along a golden trajectory. Only then would he be able to manifest a circle. He sat down and began to prepare for the formation of the circle, and with a tiny bit of intense concentration, the mana started to move along the designated trajectory. Immediately, it began to feel as though his chest was on fire near his heart, but he was forced to endure it. Otherwise, the mana would flow in reverse and severely damage his organs. He fought against it, and after a long and agonizing process, he finally succeeded in manifesting the first circle. Because of this, his blocked pathway trait has been significantly weakened. This means that his mana has become far more active, and he was now one step closer to conquering his terminal illness. He can now accumulate refined mana within the circle, and with that power, he should be able to wield magic correctly. However, he had expended the entire night reading and trying to manifest that circle. So, as soon as he rose to his feet in celebration, he collapsed from sheer exhaustion. His final fleeting thoughts as he started to drift into sleep were if Leon Hart and Ursil were going to scold him for falling asleep on the cold floor. Later that morning, Ursil came into his chambers to deliver his breakfast and discovered him passed out cold on the floor. She quickly rushed to his side and tried desperately to wake him up. She was baffled as to why he was completely unconscious and what all of these ancient books were doing inside his room. Despite the enormous toll that the entire process had taken on his body, it is truly remarkable that he had managed to successfully construct the first circle in the span of a single night. From this day forward, a brand new life as the mage Celtarian was about to begin. Meanwhile, Leon Hart had returned the pile of books to the librarian, who looked as if she was on the very verge of exploding from stress. A delectable-looking tray of food rests in the bustling kitchen, while Ursil applies the finishing touches to the final perfect piece. After a great deal of painstaking work, her masterpiece was finally complete. She blushed deeply while recalling the warm compliments Lord Kyle gives her whenever she prepares a wonderful meal for him. The very thought of receiving more praise from him brought a smile to her face, and she grabbed the plate to go and deliver it to him. On her way out of the kitchen, the very same maids who once tormented her moved over to obstruct the exit from the kitchen. They noticed the delicious food on the tray and knew immediately that it was intended for the young lord. They stared down at her with a condescending sneer and told her that she should go and take a rest, instead of delivering the meal herself. This time, they wanted to deliver the food to him personally, since they've observed that his personality has been much more agreeable as of late. Besides, serving Lord Kyle wasn't her designated responsibility before, so she can now return her position to its rightful owner and go back to their previous arrangement. Ursil firmly declined their insulting proposal. If they possessed any complaints regarding her work or wished to change it, then they could simply discuss the matter with Lord Kyle themselves. With that, she strode past them while they cried out for her to stop, but she paid their calls no mind and bumped into a blue-haired maid standing by the door. This one merely gazed at her with a look of confusion, while the other maid continued to shout insults at her. They exchanged a brief glance for a moment before she exited the kitchen to go serve Lord Kyle. As she departed, the blonde-haired maid shot a venomous glare in her direction, but ultimately didn't utter another word. She delivered the breakfast to Kyle, who dug into it with great enthusiasm, while she watched over him with a warm smile on her face. She had tried to adapt the recipe to better fit what he had taught her, and it would appear that it perfectly suits his tastes. Her cooking skills were improving more and more with each passing day. All because of him, she had been practicing diligently every single day, and she had even learned some brand new recipes from the head chef. She really was remarkably diligent and hardworking, and he admired her deeply for that. But his thoughts regarding her were currently elsewhere. He asked her how she was progressing with her spirit magic. She froze the moment he mentioned it and didn't give an immediate response. So he then requested that she bring her Introduction to Spirit Magic book, the very one he had given to her once before. She had read approximately halfway through the book thus far, and judging by the worn-out pages, she has also been studying its contents with great diligence. Since she hailed from a noble family, that also meant that she possessed a basic formal education, and her learning speed was not particularly slow. However, he was not at all satisfied with her current pace. They did not have the luxury of time to take things slowly. He needed her to learn more and to become much stronger. In 2 months' time, The Sultarian family is set to hold the heir succession ceremony, and on that fateful day, the second son, Adolf, will lead a bloody coup, aided by malevolent dark spirits, and the entire Marquis family will be annihilated. Every soul within the villa at that time will be swept up in the ensuing chaos, and Ursil, as well, will be caught right in the middle of it, where she is fated to lose her life. To prevent that future from happening, she must become stronger. To grant her more time for her studies, he decided that she would be relieved of her cooking duties for a while. For the time being, he would simply have one of the other maids take over serving him, so she wouldn't have to concern herself with it. Ursil instantly refused his offer and clutched at her clothes, as tears began to well up in her eyes. She swore that she would work even harder, so she could continue studying spirit magic while still preparing his meals. That way, she would not be neglecting either of her duties. While still crying, she begged him not to allow anyone else to serve him, so that she could continue to be by his side. Her tear-streaked face moved Kyle's very heart. It became clear that he wasn't considering her feelings in the slightest. Her entire family had collapsed in an instant, and she went from being the treasured daughter of a baronet to a common slave, then finally to a simple maid. She had even lost all contact with her family, and has no idea if they are even alive or dead. Because of all this, it makes perfect sense that she would feel deeply insecure about her life as a maid, especially since she is only now just beginning to adjust. Thus far, she has only been able to live a somewhat stable existence, thanks to his personal intervention. And now, he wanted to change all of that for what seemed to be no reason at all. It's completely understandable that she would be confused by this sudden shift. She must have surely thought that if she couldn't perform her duties as a maid to his satisfaction, then she would be thrown out of the mansion. That has to be what she is thinking, since he never took the time to explain the situation to her properly. Now that he had taken a moment to consider her delicate feelings, he decided to fully explain the entire dire situation to her. First, he reminded her of the words he spoke to her when they first met, and he brought her to this place. He told her that she belonged to him now, and that he never abandons one of his own people. That means he will forever protect them. The young maid was taken aback by his powerful words, but he continued on, explaining his true reason for demanding she learn spirit magic as well. She is an exceptional maid with truly incredible cooking talents and a diligent and meticulous work ethic besides. If she were to continue working hard just like this, then she would undoubtedly be promoted to the rank of head maid. However, there are numerous other maids in the mansion apart from her, which means that there are countless people who could replace her. At any given moment, her face shifted to an expression of pure terror, and she tried to plead her case with him once more, but he cut her off by placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Then he asked her what would occur if she were to become a spirit mage. Spirit mages were exceedingly rare and deeply respected mages, which means that if she were to become one, she would be destined to become a truly great person in the future. Everyone in the world would look up to her, and she would become the greatest spirit mage that had ever existed. Her mind began to wander, daydreaming about the adventures they could have with her as a powerful spirit mage, and Lord Kyle forever by her side. By then, there would be no one in the entire world who could ever replace her, and she would remain with him for as long as she possibly could. She still seemed deeply insecure about whether she could accomplish it at all. Greatest of all spirit mages, with his faith now her unyielding resolve. She took the ancient tome from his grasp, her voice firm as she pledged to walk the path of the spirit mage, just as he had envisioned. In that very instant, her bond with him deepened, surging by 10 whole points, and she vowed to place her absolute trust in his guidance for her destiny. Following this pledge, he formally named Ursil as his exclusive personal attendant, a new status marked by an elegant, distinguishing ribbon. From that day forward, she was entrusted with managing his personal matters, and he even relocated her from a noisy, shared maid's quarters to a secluded, private chamber of her very own. This would allow her to focus on her studies, free from the prying eyes and inevitable clashes with the other resentful maids. But she seemed far more thrilled by the fact this new room was adjacent to his own than by the added layer of personal security. Even so, he hoped that with this new arrangement, they would be able to face the coming storm and ascend to power together. After some time, she made herself at home in her new room, a sanctuary now filled with tomes for her to master, while peering through her massive collection of books. One afternoon, she spotted Kyle and Leon Hart strolling across the grand courtyard. Kyle felt her gaze upon him from the window above and sent a charming wave and a warm smile her way. She giggled softly and leaned against the window pane, watching him until he was out of sight. And in that moment, her affection for him soared to a new height of 65. Meanwhile, Whispers of Kyle's dramatic transformation reached a very unexpected individual. It appeared that the news of Kyle's metamorphosis had spread like wildfire. As of late, they observed that he had been training his body much more frequently and steadily building his physical strength. On top of this, he no longer lashed out at people so often, and more recently, he's been dedicating a significant amount of time to the study of magic. It seemed that by some miracle, his entire character had improved drastically, and he had finally matured into a proper young man. It appeared the time had finally come for Adolf to pay a long overdue visit to his once pitiful, worthless younger brother. Ursil waved back at Kyle as he continued on. He turned his attention to Leon Hart, asking him to secure a wide, open clearing that was far removed from the sight of any prying eyes. There was a certain experiment he wished to conduct within that space. He was planning to test the limits of his magic. His mind recalled a clearing in the most remote part of the estate, where it was highly unlikely they would be seen by anyone. The area was completely encircled by a dense forest of ancient trees, making it nearly impossible to see anything from beyond its borders. That made it the perfect stage for the test the young noble intended to carry out. He commanded Leon Hart to ensure that no one could approach them. Then, he positioned himself in the center of the field and steeled himself to finally unleash a true spell. Leon Hart watched him from a distance, a shadow of doubt clouding his mind. Lord Kyle had always been crippled, unable to wield magic or practice the sword, due to his crippling hermimum disease. Merely glancing at a few magic tomes over several days was not going to rewrite that unchangeable fact. However, the current Kyle might just possess a way to shatter those limitations. Somehow, the white-haired noble conjured a swirling ball of magic in his palm, then launched it forth as a magic missile aimed at a colossal tree. The spell erupted in a blinding flash of pure light and utterly obliterated the massive tree upon impact. Leon Hart, and even Kyle himself, were left reeling in shock by the sheer destructive power he had just unleashed. The splintered tree slowly crashed to the side as the two of them watched, stunned. Still shocked by the incredible output of power he had just displayed, Kyle immediately spun around to face Leon Hart and demanded to know if the sound had reached the main mansion. Thankfully, the quick-thinking knight had used his own aura to suppress the explosion shockwave. That meant that no one would have heard the sound of the falling tree. Either his incredible reflexes had just saved the both of them from some very difficult questions. While that was certainly a relief for the both of them, there was a much larger question that remained to be answered. When, and more importantly how, did Lord Kyle manifest a magic circle? Kyle simply replied that he had formed it just a short while ago, after following the detailed instructions laid out in the library's ancient book. Somehow, through the use of those techniques, he was able to tap into his previously blocked mana reserves, since he had successfully cast a spell and manifested a magic circle. That meant he had now completely conquered his hermimum disease. To offer even more undeniable proof, he conjured a brilliant magic orb in his hand and displayed it proudly for Leon Hart. In that very moment, the bold promises that the young lord had made flashed through the knight's mind. He had sworn that he would do anything to cure his own illness, and that he had no intention of accepting a premature death. Incredibly, he had actually managed to accomplish the impossible. Leon Hart had sensed something profoundly different about the white hair. Delinquent for some time now, but he never imagined that this was the cause. He warmly and genuinely congratulated Kyle on his momentous achievement, and his affinity increased by another 10 points, as he had now begun to truly admire the boy. This was to be expected from a man who valued perseverance above all else. He is easily moved by people who achieve greatness through their own sweat and hard work. However, there were still several more questions that needed to be asked, like the unbelievable fact that he had only manifested the first circle, yet the power he had just displayed was definitely far beyond a simple first circle incantation. The raw power of a first circle spell is typically just about equivalent to the strength of a punch from an average adult human male. But the destructive blast he unleashed had the force of a fourth circle spell, which is far more advanced than any magic a mere beginner should ever be able to conjure. Despite that staggering fact, though, he is still technically a first-level mage, which makes his capacity to cast such powerful spells even more astounding. Could it be that Lord Kyle is, in fact, some kind of hidden magical prodigy? No matter how one looks at the situation, this level of power is simply far too conspicuous. Thanks to his unique mind's eye ability, he was able to instantly absorb all the first circle magic books in the library. If it hadn't been for that miraculous skill, it would have taken him months to successfully manifest a single circle. The skill also revealed to him that magic was wielded differently from how he recalled in the game's world. According to these ancient magic books, He had to inscribe a highly complex magic circle to even begin using magic. Then, after wading through a series of difficult equations and complex calculations, he then had to activate the circle by meticulously circulating his mana. The entire process was far longer and much more archaic than the methods he remembered from the game. In the game, all he needed to do was draw a simple magic symbol with his mana, and the spell would activate almost instantaneously. This method was significantly easier to utilize, and far more potent than the complicated methods he was now forced to learn. On top of all that, he had also memorized every magic symbol in the game, over the vast amount of time he had played it. Since the local methods were far too complex for his taste, he decided to wield magic in a much more user-friendly manner, just like he had done in the game. But the end result was infinitely more powerful than he could have imagined. If anyone were to discover just how strong he was with these unique techniques, then that would pose a serious problem. Now is not the time to reveal the true extent of his strength, and it would be much wiser if he kept it a closely guarded secret. He implored Leon Hart to keep what he had witnessed today a complete secret, even from the head of the entire family. Leon Hart was utterly baffled as to why he would want such a thing, prompting Kyle to try and persuade him by making a ridiculously cute face that only caused the knight's affinity to plummet instead. So, changing tactics, he decided to explain to Leon Hart the precise reason he wished to conceal the true strength of his powers. It was all because of the succession ceremony in 2 months' time. It is a monumental tradition within the Marquis Altarian family, one that determines the next in line to lead. The successor is not determined by their age, but rather through a fierce competition. All of their attributes are judged simultaneously, including their character, their wisdom, their public support, and a myriad of other factors. All of these things are used to decide who is the most promising heir, to guide the family toward even greater prosperity. Because of his upstanding and reliable nature, his primary backers were the family's most long-serving retainers. At present, there are 2 main contenders vying for this coveted position. The eldest son, the noble Abel Saltarian, and the second son, the ambitious Adolf Elterian. These 2 figures were of paramount importance to the story's progression. Abel Saltarian is the son of the legitimate wife of the Marquis of Saltarian, and he was also considered the most probable candidate for heir. He possesses a gentle disposition and truly exceptional swordsmanship skills. And on top of that, he's been groomed to be the heir since his childhood, and he was raised with immense expectations as a model of the elite. Then there is the second son, Adolf Saltarian, who was also born from a legitimate wife. He was constantly overshadowed by his more prominent elder brother Abel, and that meant he was often overlooked for many long years. However, at some point during his development, Adolf's personality grew to become more composed, and his swordsmanship abilities improved with startling rapidity, which caused him to stand out conspicuously among the crowd. This meant that Adolf's supporters were primarily young and passionate knights. He carried almost the same vibe as a fearsome gang leader, and these 2 overpowering personalities clashed violently in a hallway. Back at the main mansion, the moment they laid eyes on one another, Adolf shot a truly murderous glare in his older brother's direction. Abel, on the other hand, didn't seem as though he was bothered in the slightest. He greeted his younger brother with perfect civility, especially since it had been quite a long time since they had last met. In fact, he claimed he was so lost in his own thoughts that he didn't even notice the younger man's approach. At least, that's the story he tells. But for a man who manifested his powerful aura at just 5 years of age, it was completely impossible to believe that he would be unable to sense another's presence. That was merely a tale from long ago, and even if Abel dismissed it as a simple fluke, something that wasn't worth bragging about, it was still vastly superior to his younger brother, who failed to manifest his own aura until he was 15 years old. The older men who accompanied Abel joked that the younger brother might just be slow-witted and lacking in talent. And of course, some people simply tend to get off to a slower start. After all, these casual insults were more than enough to provoke Adolf's subordinates, who moved to confront the older men in a fit of rage, but he commanded them to stand down. They were inside the main house at that moment, and acting so recklessly could negatively impact his stand. It appeared that he had trained his followers quite well, and Abel condescendingly suggested that he might actually be worthy of being a candidate and the next heir of the household. Adolf only scoffed at the infuriatingly snobbish attitude of his elder brother. As far as he was concerned, Abel would have no reason to be laughing for much longer. With that, he ordered his subordinates to proceed down the vast hallway, and they marched off, all while Abel watched them depart with a suspicious and calculating glare. Later on, Kyle summoned a meeting with Leon Hart and Ursil in his private bedroom. The topic was the impending succession ceremony, which was now fated to be held in just 2 months' time. The ceremony held no regard for those born of legitimate or illegitimate means. All that mattered was their raw strength, and that meant that any direct descendant of the lord of the household was eligible to compete for the prestigious position of heir. Well, at least that's what was written on paper. In reality, there were certain exceptions to that rule, and the youngest son, Kyle, just happened to be one of them. Due to Kyle's chronic illness, he was excluded from the competitions by default. The third son, the young Duke, was also not involved in the heated competition, not just because he was far too young, but also because in terms of his skills in both sword fighting and magic, there is absolutely no comparison between him and the rest of his brothers. Therefore, the most likely candidates for the esteemed position were his two oldest brothers. Neither of them would appreciate any unforeseen surprises appearing at this critical stage of the game, especially since they were now so dangerously close to the succession ceremony. So, one can only imagine what would happen if it suddenly became known that Kyle had developed an immense power. At a pivotal time like this, he who was once seen as a mere fool, who wasn't even worthy of being in their line of sight, now he suddenly appeared poised to rise as a legendary dark horse. There were only two possible reactions to this shocking news. They would either try to persuade him to ally with their cause, or they would come straight for his head. It might seem like a drastic train of thought at first, but history has always been filled with bloodshed for the position of heir, so it was not the craziest notion. According to the original game's setting, Abel is, at his core, a good person, meaning there was a very low probability that he would choose the more drastic of the two deadly options. Adolf, on the other hand, was almost certainly guaranteed to try and take his younger brother's head. That man was already fated to slaughter his entire family from the start, so there was no doubt the elder brother would try to eliminate it the moment he discovered he had mastered a powerful form of magic. Because of all this, the only course of action he had was to conquer his hermimum and grow stronger. He may possess a promising future, but as the youngest first circle mage, it was fine to either recruit him as a potential ally or to suffer no major loss, even if they did. Now that he possessed a more detailed understanding of the grim situation, he chose to trust in Kyle's judgment and keep his powers a secret for the time being. But as soon as the succession ceremony concluded, he would report this entire matter directly to the head of the family. Kyle's insistence on secrecy seemed to be lowering his affinity with the knight, but there was nothing else he could do in this precarious situation. Right now, Leon Hart's loyalty belonged to his father, so he couldn't expect the knight to suddenly switch his allegiance to him. It wasn't impossible, though, and this was already a far better scenario than what existed before. Even so, he was already certain that he could make the older man follow him, one way or the other. His unchecked ambition was so potent that even Leon Hart could feel it. The knight turned back to look at Kyle and asked if he was truly serious about becoming a powerful mage. The Marquis of Calterian is renowned for their unparalleled swordsmanship, but would also be incredibly beneficial if he became a useful mage. The very thought of the fact that Kyle would soon be making positive contributions to the entire family made Leon Hart smile, and his affinity for the boy grew by a large margin. Kyle was shocked that it grew so suddenly out of nowhere, and he had no clue as to how that even transpired. Could it possibly be because they all ate a meal together in his room? That's why the knight had been complimenting Ursil on her amazing cooking right after they had concluded their talk. So, in the hopes of continuing to raise their affinity even further, Kyle suggested that they all eat together in his room from that day forward. Leon Hart was not nearly as thrilled with that particular idea and suggested that they simply eat together in the knight's quarters instead. But Ursil was secretly ecstatic about the sudden invitation. Later on that night, Kyle sat on the floor of his expansive room, studying the complex magic symbols he knew from his previous life in the game. These ancient symbols allowed him to activate his magic as fast as possible, with an incredible amount of devastating power as well. But in this new world, he was unable to control how powerful his spells were. It was already incredibly difficult to handle as it was, but now he'll have to figure out how to manage it before he can use his magic out in the open. For the time being, though, he decided to completely ignore all of that and just attempt to seal the powerful symbols up for now. There would surely be a chance to show off his magic eventually, but to avoid drawing unwanted attention, he would have to stick to using basic magic for the time being. The magic activation method in this world is slow and difficult to master, but it does allow for much more precise control. Then, a brilliant idea struck him. Since the magic activation method allowed him to control his magic output and the symbol activation method allowed him to cast far more powerful spells in a shorter amount of time, then he should be able to combine the two of them and gain the advantages of both worlds. He tried to merge them, and the system immediately flashed a warning of a high risk of a magical explosion from what he was about to attempt. The notification window appearing so suddenly startled him enough that he leaped back in complete shock. But it would seem that the combination was actually possible. The system then asked him if he was certain that he wished to proceed, despite the immense risks involved. However, high risks usually meant that he would reap high rewards from it, and he was not going to get anywhere in life without taking any risks. With that resolve in mind, he began the process of mixing the two separate activation methods, all while the status window continued to flash warnings of the imminent danger of a magical explosion. Then, it asked him one final time if he wished to proceed with it, and he agreed to it with great excitement. Then, the system began analyzing his body and his past experiences to determine if he had the capability to merge the two activation methods. Once the analysis was finally complete, the two spells successfully combined, and he was able to create a new form of magic by merging both of his spellcasting techniques into a single, unified one. With that task done, he tried to continue playing around with the new spell to see just how efficient he could make the incantation until his room began to crackle with raw, untamed electricity, and he realized a moment too late that something was terribly wrong. Ursil was walking outside with a pile of fresh towels in her hands. She suddenly heard a massive explosion coming from the direction of Kyle's room and rushed over to see what was happening. Inside his private room, she found Kyle sitting on the floor, surrounded by a mess of dirt and stones, all while there was a giant, gaping hole in the wall. His magic practice had not gone as he had intended, and he had ended up blowing up his entire room. He probably should have practiced outside instead, once he saw the system's warning message. But for next time, he would set up far better conditions for his future experiments. As they were talking, Leon Hart burst into the room to investigate the noise, and also began freaking out when he saw the obliterated wall. He asked them to at least help him clean the disastrous room up first. However, all of his precious books were also ruined by the explosion. A short while later, we find Ursil back in the kitchen, attempting to whip up something delicious for our protagonist, Kyle. But judging by the troubled look on her face, things were not exactly going according to plan. She couldn't quite pinpoint what was wrong. Her food smelled completely bland, and she definitely did not want to hear Kyle complain about how tasteless it was once again. As she was completely lost in thought, another maid strolled casually into the room. This one was named Daisy, and she couldn't resist the urge to tease Ursil about how serious she always looks when she's cooking for Kyle, each and every day. But Ursil didn't even flinch. She simply kept her head down and stated it was her job. So, of course, she wanted to perform it with the utmost level of care. Daisy was a little taken aback by how focused Ursil was and decided to offer her a helping hand. She suggested adding just a pinch of nutmeg to the simmering stew and claimed it would boost the flavor and make it much, much richer. She even urged her to just give it a try and see if it cleared up her doubts. Ursil looked a bit hesitant at first, but eventually, she sprinkled a little nutmeg into the stew, gave it a very quick taste, and was completely amazed at how much better it tasted. With a look of adorable curiosity, she asked her senior if she was really so good at cooking. Why not teach her? Daisy smiled, though it was a slightly sinister-looking smile, and agreed to her request right away. She said she'd be more than happy to help if she could. But first things first, Daisy suggested they take the completed food to Kyle. After loading up the serving trolley, they began to wheel it towards his room. As they walked along, Daisy asked how Lord Kyle had been doing lately, mentioning that she's heard he has become much more composed. She admitted she had been really concerned when Ursil became his personal maid, fearing he might cause trouble for her or mistreat her in some way. Ursil quickly reassured her that Lord Kyle actually treated her very well. She mentioned that she's heard he's become quite a responsible young man lately, waking up early every day for exercise and studying a great deal. Ursil was intrigued by how she was asking so many personal questions, but she eventually did confirm that Kyle really does work incredibly hard at his studies. The scene then transitions back to our protagonist, where Ursil shares with him how Daisy seemed very interested in him and had asked a lot of probing questions, even about who Kyle had been meeting with lately. Our boy then asked her what exactly she had told Daisy. Ursil replied that she had not revealed much because she did not want to disclose anything personal about it. She then asks if she had done well, and our boy gives her a big thumbs up, acknowledging that she had indeed made the right choice by not revealing any crucial information to her. He also instructs her that moving forward, it is alright to give out more moderate answers. It will be difficult to keep it a complete secret that he has overcome his Hermimum illness and begun the path of learning magic. As Ursil departs, Kyle reflects on how his second eldest brother has now begun to make his sinister move. As night descended upon the grand mansion, the Marquis's booming voice echoed with sheer disbelief. The head of the entire Celtarian family was utterly stunned to learn that Kyle had truly conquered his illness. The knight confirmed it once more, stating that it was indeed the truth. The youngest son was now diligently studying magic on his own and had apparently already achieved the first magic circle. Though our boy's powers extended far beyond the first circle, Leon Hart decided to keep that crucial information to himself because such a stunning revelation would be far too much for the head of the family to handle. The Marquis remained deeply skeptical, and he was finding this news incredibly difficult to believe. The father then recalled how Kyle had been in a terrible condition. The last time he saw him, throwing violent tantrums for no apparent reason. At that time, he had to resolve the issue by giving Kyle a solid punch to quiet him down. Momentarily, he then asked how old Kyle was now. The knight reported that his 13th birthday had only just passed. That is when the head of the house revealed a critical detail, which is that to overcome Hermimum, one would require either exceptional talent in magic or in swordsmanship, talents that typically manifest around the ages of 5 or 6. He wondered if there were any recorded cases of someone conquering Hermimum as late as the age of 13. The knight admitted he was unsure of any such cases, but claimed he had personally witnessed Kyle overcome his curse and utilize first circle magic with his own 2 eyes. Upon hearing this, the father wondered if it could possibly be a miracle. He then asked Leon Hart if he should meet with his young son personally. Leon Hart reminded him that it was ultimately his decision to make, but the head of the family somberly said he was not sure if he should meet with Kyle, as he might still harbor a deep resentment against his own father. But that's when the knight revealed the exact opposite to the Marquis. He explained that Kyle actually wishes to speak with his father, and if there was something the Marquis wished to convey, the knight offered to personally deliver the message. Hearing this, the father decided he would meet with Kyle in person. The scene flashes back to a moment from earlier, when before meeting with the head of the family, the knight had asked Kyle if he had any message to relay to his father. That is also when our protagonist boldly stepped outside the designated boundaries of the mansion and walked into the main courtyard. The knight reminded him that he was still under strict house arrest and could not leave the annex without the Marquis's explicit permission. Kyle, with an unwavering confidence, replied that this was precisely why he wanted to meet his father, directly, face to face. The knight was startled for a moment by the sheer boldness in his expression, and he hesitated, unsure of what to say. Kyle then pleaded with the knight, giving him an irresistibly charming and cute look. Eventually, the knight had no other choice but to agree to the young master's plan. In the present, when the father hears that his son does not resent him, he is left completely speechless. The knight clears his throat dramatically and repeats that Kyle wishes to meet with him. By the way, this esteemed man is Remtun Saltarian, the head of the prestigious swordsmanship family, the Marquis of the Saltarians, protectors of the family from monstrous beasts for generations, and one of only 5 sword masters on the entire continent. He is, of course, Kyle's father. When our boy notices a portrait of the head of the family, his hand begins to tremble uncontrollably. He realizes that it's the original Kyle's body reacting on its own, remembering the deep-seated fear and resentment towards his father. He recalls the incredibly harsh days the original owner of this body endured, the fear and the apprehension still lingering deep within him, the constant, cruel reminders from his father that he was a good-for-nothing son had left him utterly devastated, and those memories now weigh heavily on Kyle's soul. His father had never once hesitated to remind him of his worthlessness. Letting out a heavy sigh, our boy reflects on how the recent memories of the original Kyle have now become his own memories, too, since Lee Hyun-woo and the original Kyle's souls have merged through the act of possession. The immense pressure and the pain that the previous owner once felt are now fully transmitted directly to him as well. But that is precisely why our boy intends to change everything. He is determined to show everyone that the Kyle of old, the scared and broken boy, is gone forever as part of this new body. Now, he vows to prove Kyle's true worth to the entire world and to himself. When he finally stands before the imposing figure of the Marquis, the man begins their conversation by demanding if he has something that he wishes to say. Kyle responds with a clear, powerful voice, saying yes, Lord Marquis. The Marquis remains silent for a long moment, noticing how boldly his son now addresses him as Marquis instead of father. It makes him wonder why this insolent brat actually wanted to meet with him. He then points out that Kyle had been given very clear instructions not to leave the confines of his room without permission recently, though he does acknowledge that Kyle was granted access to the library for his studies. So, he warns his son that if he dares to cause any more trouble, this time it will not end with just simple confinement. An instinctual tremor seized his frame under his father's crushing voice, and he could not escape the oppressive weight of his past self's trauma. The man noted the gaping chasm of distrust that stood between him and his son, though he conceded that such a feeling was understandable, considering the endless chaos this body's previous owner had caused. Then, a spark of curiosity ignited. He had to know his father's true power. As one of the continent's 5 legendary sword masters, so he attempted to analyze his stats using his unique system ability. However, the system immediately faltered, unable to process the data of such a high-caliber and powerful opponent. Realizing his system's intel was utterly useless in this situation, he decided to pivot his entire strategy toward negotiation. He calmly articulated his position to his father, explaining that the very reason he had formally requested this audience through the night Leon Hart was specifically to avoid leaving his room without express permission. The Marquis' eyes widened slightly, impressed by how skillfully his son had just parried his pointed accusation. He couldn't help but observe how Kyle now spoke with the poise of an adult, exactly as the whispers had foretold. Kyle then acknowledged his deeply troubled past behavior and admitted that he had caused a great deal of trouble and annoyance with his previous childish and reckless actions. He took complete ownership of all the foolishness of his past, and with a deep, respectful bow, he sincerely conveyed his deepest regrets. He vowed that he would change for the better. The father was utterly baffled by the drastic transformation in his son's demeanor. How could a worthless brat like Kyle even conceive of apologizing? He was astounded that a child, who once blamed everyone else and flew into a rage every single day, was now saying something so mature. As our hero decided to speak once more, his father anxiously braced himself, wondering what could possibly come next. Kyle then dropped a bombshell, declaring he wanted to propose a deal with him. Intrigued, the Marquis asked what kind of arrangement Kyle had in mind. Our protagonist, first of all, reminded his powerful father that he must have already received the formal report from Leon Hart about him conquering his Hermann disease. The father confirmed he had indeed heard of it, but found it difficult to accept that such a miraculous event could actually take place. Kyle insisted it was the truth. To prove his claim, he manifested a brilliant fire in the palm of his hand, revealing to his stunned father that he now wielded first circle magic abilities. The father was completely and utterly blown away. Once again, he hadn't truly believed Leon Hart's earlier words, but witnessing Kyle's magical abilities with his own 2 eyes left him completely at a loss for words. He confirmed that he could indeed see the mana flowing within Kyle's body. Our hero also claimed that it was the truth, and that he would only grow stronger as time passed. Mages who conquer Hermamum are known for possessing exceptional latent potential. Kyle added that it took him a mere few days to reach the first circle, entirely through self-study, and a mage of such a level is said to be as valuable as an entire order of knights. He acknowledged that the legendary Soltarian family is famous for its peerless swordsmanship, but possessing top-tier magic among its direct descendants will be a truly great addition. He proposed that if the family would support his growth as a mage, he hoped to become a powerful asset and help the Soltarian Marquis stand above all, with both unrivaled swordsmanship and magic, elevating their family's legendary status in the country. Kyle concluded by asking his father for his thoughts on this proposal. He reminded him that this was a deal that would benefit both the family and himself, and requested that his father consider investing in him as a newly capable talent. After cornering his father with his impeccable proposal, Kyle also reflected on life's fundamental give-and-take nature. He knew the surest way to gain favor is to demonstrate what you can offer in return. The Soltarian family values its honor and its own benefit above all else, and merely sharing the family blood would never persuade his father. The previous Kyle had tried to gain attention through causing trouble, but those pathetic methods had only ever backfired. But our protagonist is far wiser than the previous Kyle, and he understood that aligning their mutual interests could bridge even the most fractured of relationships. Meanwhile, the father was completely at a loss for words. He was left wondering if this was truly the same Kyle that he knew. He seemed so profoundly different from the child he had once been. Kyle once more asked his father to support him and help to nurture his newfound talent. Of course, this sudden transformation in his son's character had officially shattered his father's perception of him, and he wasn't even sure how he should respond. He kept wondering if this was really the same child he had known. The way Kyle spoke so skillfully and negotiated with such ease was something his father had never, ever expected from him. Achieving your goals through masterful negotiation and learning to wield both power and authority is a vital skill for any aristocratic child. It was hard to believe that the boy who once threw endless tantrums was now speaking in such a manner. The child he had once considered a failure and had completely neglected had shown such truly remarkable growth. He decided to recognize Kyle as a valuable asset to the Seltarian family. Not surprisingly, his son was momentarily startled when his father agreed so readily. The man then also promised that he would provide all of the necessary funding and magic stones required for his studies, and instructed his son to make sure he proved his worth. Kyle smiled brightly in response and assured his father that he would live up to his expectations. A few days later, we see the astonished faces of both Leon Hart and Ursil. Apparently, they're standing inside the brand new magic workshop that Kyle has acquired to help nurture his magic. He looks quite pleased with himself and proudly asks for their opinions. He explains how he has reinforced the entire structure with powerful barrier magic artifacts, equipped it with all the tools for crafting potions and other artifacts. And he is also relieved that there won't be any more holes in the walls. From now on, Leon Hart was the first one to react, and he clearly looks fascinated by the fact that Kyle managed to afford all of this, given how astronomically expensive it must have been. That's when our protagonist realized he had forgotten to mention that this was all funded directly by his father. He explains that all he had to do was charm his father just a little bit, and he gladly provided all the necessary funds. Leon Hart is a bit disturbed by this explanation, finding it hard to imagine that simple charms could possibly work on a man like Remton Seltarian. Kyle then opens another subchamber within his workshop and invites Ursil to come take a look inside. She sees even more advanced equipment neatly arranged on the shelves, but that is not the main point of interest here. Kyle explains that it's difficult to wield spirit magic freely in the main chamber, so he made sure to create a separate space for it. This new area is fully equipped with soundproofing and dustproofing, so she can practice her spirit magic without any outside worries. Ursil looks anxious as she gazes around the room, because she is not sure if she truly deserves this much generosity. Kyle happily informs her that it is for her to use as much as she pleases. He reminds her again that he doesn't want her to be just a simple maid, performing only menial tasks. He wants her to grow into an irreplaceable spirit mage, one that will become his most trusted aide. Not surprisingly, the young girl bows her head, deeply moved by how highly her master now regards her. She even begins to cry and vows to work incredibly hard, to learn diligently, and become someone who will be truly helpful to him. As she makes this solemn promise, her favorability rating with him rises to 70. Just as they're sharing this touching, heartfelt moment, the spirit stones on the shelves begin to react violently, and a brilliant energy starts to illuminate the entire area. They look around and see that the spirit magic circle is suddenly activated, entirely on its own. Kyle asks her if she has done something, but she quickly denies it. But it doesn't take him long to realize what has happened. The blue energy begins to coalesce and transforms into a cute, fluffy creature with tiny wings that quickly rushes towards Ursil and hugs her very tightly. Our protagonist confirms for us that what we have just witnessed was a legendary spirit summoning ritual, and that the cute, fluffy ball is, in fact, a familiar, given that it immediately clung so tightly to Ursil. It is clear that she is the one who summoned this spirit. He isn't too surprised, however, considering her immense, latent talent for spirit magic. He compliments her on her incredible skills, but Ursil points out that she literally didn't do anything at all. Kyle, in response, explains that spirit magic is vastly different from casting normal spells or reciting complex incantations. It involves feeling the raw spirit's energy found in nature and connecting with it directly through the soul. When her emotions were so highly elevated, the spirit stones inside his workshop had responded and summoned this spirit on her behalf. He then instructs her to look at the shelves, where all the precious spirit stones that were previously there are now gone. Ursil is bewildered to see that it is true and feels a bit uneasy about the loss. But the boy reassures her that it is perfectly fine, as they were always meant to be used anyway, as the spirit clings to the girl. Kyle reflects on how he never expected her to summon a spirit so quickly. He is quite curious about what kind of spirit this creature is when he tries to use his system to examine it. The system reveals that it is a high-ranking spirit and cannot be identified with his current insight skill. He then directly asks her what kind of spirit it is. Ursil chats with a little furball and responds that the spirit is known as Asura, an ancient spirit of pure light. Kyle is utterly shocked by this revelation, and he finds it incredibly hard to believe that this chubby little spirit is actually the legendary ancient spirit of light. Well, it seems like he might have annoyed the spirit by calling it chubby. Apparently, ancient spirits are so incredibly rare that even top-level spirit mages might only manage to summon one after pouring all of their spirit stones into the difficult process and spending countless days and nights on it. The fact that Ursil was able to summon this spirit in a single attempt is absolutely and utterly mind-boggling. What is even more fascinating is that she was able to summon this powerful spirit unconsciously. Meanwhile, the spirit is still fuming about being called chubby and starts pinching our protagonist relentlessly. Ursil then quickly explains that this is not the spirit's true form, and if it were to revert to its normal form, the entire mansion might just collapse. The bird finally ceases pinching Kyle. Ursil then reveals that the spirit wishes to be friends with her. Kyle quickly realizes that the spirit must be suggesting they form a binding contract, since it was originally summoned by Ursil. The girl then promptly asks the spirit if it is okay to form the said contract, and the fur ball chirps a very positive response. A brilliant yellow light illuminates as the circle activates, and Ursil formally asks the spirit of pure light if it will form a contract with her. After some ancient formalities, it's time to give the new spirit a name. Kyle quickly suggests the name Padaki, and Ursil agrees, bestowing the name upon the new spirit. The system confirms that the spirit's name is now officially Padaki, and the registration has been successfully completed. The little fur ball quickly flies over to its new master, and Ursil states that she looks forward to working together with Padaki. Starting today, the spirit chirps a positive response once again, as they share a moment of true affection. Kyle reflects on how well his talent discovery project is proceeding. A few days pass, and we see our hero catching up with his older brother. Adolf, the big brother, starts the conversation by offering an apology, claiming he has not given much attention to his little brother lately. As his older brother, Kyle remains modest and replies that it's nothing, as he should have been the one to seek out his brother first. It is clear they're not just exchanging simple brotherly affection, as there is a thick, palpable tension between them. Ursil serves tea to Adolf and then quickly moves away. As she departs, Adolf watches her with a purposeful, intense gaze and quickly recognizes her as the very same slave that Kyle had purchased from the slave market. He can't help but comment on how truly beautiful she looks for a simple maid. Our protagonist responds that his main intention was simply to hire a maid. His brother then asks if he can take Ursil with him. As soon as these foul words fall upon Kyle's ears, he is unable to take another sip of his tea and remains deathly silent, inwardly cursing his brother as absolute trash. However, he maintains his outward composure and politely asks if there is no other girl he would prefer. Instead, he begins pretending as if he is romantically interested in Ursil as well, because this is the only way he can possibly avoid offending his evil brother. Adolf takes the bait and quickly dismisses the entire idea, claiming he is not the type of man to steal a girl from his younger brother. We then hear Adolf's internal thoughts as well, and the reason he is avoiding taking the maid becomes crystal clear, which is that he cannot afford to make an enemy of his younger brother just yet by snatching away his favorite girl. Besides, he has heard the rumors that Kyle is no longer that troublemaking brat, but seeing him with women at such a young age only confirms for Adolf that Kyle is likely heading down a much darker path. For Adolf, this makes it even easier to lead his foolish brother further into the shadows. Adolf then begins to tease him, saying that if he had known his young brother was such an interesting young man, he would have tried to get closer to him sooner. He points out how much Kyle has clearly improved, to which our hero simply agrees, mentioning that his daily life no longer has any major issues. His hermimum isn't fully recovered just yet, but it is gradually getting much better. Looks like the big brother was not expecting to hear this, and he promptly asks if he is actually recovering. Kyle explains that it is a long-term illness, so it is difficult to cure all at once, but it is improving step by step. He then shows his brother some of his magic, telling him it is a spell he personally created that's about 1.5 times more powerful than regular magic. He asks Adolf what he thinks about it. Well, the big brother is quite impressed to see that Kyle can create his own spells as well. What shocks him is that Kyle is learning magic so rapidly, even though he is not yet fully recovered from his debilitating illness. He begins to worry that our protagonist might become an obstacle to his own succession to heir. He also can't help but to notice that Kyle's entire attitude has suddenly transformed, as if he is becoming a completely different person. His magical skills are also growing day by day as well. He wants to be more cautious, but in the end, he just views Kyle as a simple 12-year-old kid, so there is nothing to be so wary about. He then decides to manipulate his junior brother for his own advantage, and if he ever becomes useless, Adolf simply plans to discard him like a piece of trash. So he directly asks Kyle if he might be interested in joining his political faction. The invitation completely surprises Kyle, leaving him unsure of how he should respond. A heavy silence falls as Adolf eagerly awaits his reply. Kyle then smiles purposefully, as if he has figured out the perfect answer. Adolf decides to inform their father about the developing situation, and Kyle thanks him for taking care of it. Afterward, as the big brother prepares to depart, he opens the door with a loud creak and Leon Hart, standing guard outside, hears the sound and promptly pays respects to Adolf. Adolf then recalls that Leon Hart is another significant obstacle in his path. This particular knight is not an easy opponent, as despite any and all temptations, he has not switched his allegiance. He then throws a verbal jab at Leon Hart, remarking how it is quite a sight that the knight has been reduced to guarding a snot-nosed little brat. With that, Adolf walks away with his personal escort. Afterward, the knight simply turns around and enters the room, where he finds Kyle still enjoying some refreshing, cool tea. Our protagonist then happily informs his knight that his brother Adolf has asked him to join the subjugation squad. He further explains that his new role will involve working with Baron Jerome, a close aide to Adolf's personal 5th Legion. This mission will most likely serve as a test of loyalty to his brothers and present an opportunity for him to earn merit and gain personal recognition for the family. Leon Hart is quite surprised by this news and quickly says that if Kyle is joining the subjugation squad, he wishes to go along as well. However, our protagonist turns him down, explaining that having a knight there would put his brother Adolf on guard, and he wants to earn his big brother's trust on his own, and can't have someone from their father's faction with him. Leon Hart points out that the mission is incredibly dangerous, but Kyle explains that his brother Adolf will not easily trust him. He'll want to see how useful Kyle is in a real combat situation, and might even deliberately expose him to grave danger. My guy then flicks his fingers, and a fire begins to burn brightly in the palm of his hands. He reassures his loyal knight that he has learned a few new tricks to protect himself, so he isn't too worried about it. He adds that he will not reveal all of his abilities during the mission, and then asks Leon Hart if he has ever heard of something called ogre perfumes. Before we can get more details on that, the scene transitions to the lush green countryside, where a group of soldiers have set up their camp in the woods. Apparently, we are in the south of the Tristan territory, known for its dangerous, monster-infested forest. The Seltron family regularly sends out subjugation squads to clear the monsters there. And as expected, Kyle is a part of this very team. In the camp, a thin, mustached man introduces himself as Baron Jerome, the designated partner of our protagonist, and they will be working side by side for this particular subjugation mission. Our boy smiles back at the older man and mentions that this is his first time in a real combat situation. So he is looking forward to working together with someone more experienced. Like the Baron, the man reciprocates the kind gesture and promises to protect him no matter what happens. However, while the Baron appears supportive on the surface, our hero senses that something is off. The man has a negative affinity score of 40, which is not a very good sign. It is unclear what our protagonist might have done to upset him in the past, but he decides to remain cautious. The Baron then decided to head out to prepare for their upcoming tasks. As our hero walks away, the Baron reflects that Kyle is just a mere circle mage, new and completely inexperienced. The Baron decides to keep a close eye on him, assessing his skills and ensuring his safety. After all, what trouble could a recently bettered-in child possibly cause? After a short while, we see these little goblins are being completely taken down by our boy's magical prowess. The soldiers standing on the sidelines can't help but praise our protagonist for his very impressive skills. As he takes down the goblins left and right, his affinity with them continues to rise. With just a snap of his fingers, another horde of goblins is completely set ablaze. The knights all around him clap and cheer for his amazing performance, and Kyle could not help but to bask in all the glory. The Baron showers him with effusive praise, declaring him absolutely incredible, and points out that this subjugation battle has been the easiest one they have ever experienced. Right at that very moment, the Baron's affinity jumps from a negative 40 to a positive 50, almost instantaneously. This unexpected development fascinates Kyle, because he has never seen anyone so incredibly easy to handle. The soldiers, on the other hand, continue their happy dance, and the Baron is confident that his brother, Adolf, will be pleased to hear about Kyle's outstanding performance. This puts a wide smile on our protagonist's face, since his first plan has now been successfully secured, and it is now time to move on to part 2. As night falls, everyone gathers back at the main camp for a booze-filled celebration of their easy and stress-free victory. Kyle downplays his own role, saying there is nothing to congratulate him for. But the Baron insists on acknowledging his incredible magical skills. The other soldiers all agree, admitting they had initially misunderstood their young lord. They point out how he is still so very young and had been living inside the mansion, leading them to believe he would struggle with both combat and camp. Their expectations were completely and utterly upended, when not only did Kyle bravely participate in the fierce battle. But he also did not complain about the rough camping conditions. In fact, he proved to be quite mature for his young age. When asked about it, our hero explains that since his brother, Adolf, must have dealt with these same challenges during monster subjugations, he felt he should also act brave and mature, just like his big brother, Adolf. Everyone is deeply moved by his heartfelt words, and some even tear up at the thought of Kyle's deep admiration for his brother, Adolf. It seems our protagonist's strategy worked perfectly. The soldiers quickly agreed to report back to their brother Adolf about his insane performance, and they are quite eager to inform Adolf about how much his young brother truly likes him. The favorability also rises up to a positive 60, as everyone feels a warm appreciation for him. As midnight approaches, and all the soldiers are now deep in their sleep, Kyle decides to take a quick look around before he heads to bed. The patrolling guard requests that he not go too far, and with that, our protagonist promptly leaves. Kyle is actually quite pleased that this bunch of stupid heads do not suspect him of anything, just because they view him as a simple kid. He also reflects on how most of the knights have fallen fast asleep after celebrating their recent victory. All night long, there are a few guards still on duty, but they do not seem to be much of a threat. At that moment, he pulls out a bottle of dark perfume. It turns out to be ogre perfume, which can summon ogres from within a 10-kilometer radius. He used to farm experience with these in the game, so he's quite familiar with its potent effects. The scene transitions back a little to when Kyle first mentioned ogre perfume in front of Leon Hart. The knight quickly confirms that he has never heard of it before. In response, Kyle says that if no one knows about this, then he must be the very first creator of it, which also confirms the fact that the recipe for ogre perfume is not yet known in this world. He explains that it is a perfume that summons ogres within its radius, with the quality determining how large the radius is. Leon Hart reminds him that the goal of the subjugation squad is to tackle a mere goblin den, and that ogres are high-level monsters, so the squad will surely struggle against them. Kyle confirms that this is exactly what he is aiming for. He points out that there are 12 high-level expert knights in the entire subjugation squad, so while goblins would be easily manageable, ogres are a completely different story. Furthermore, the rest of the soldiers in the 5th Legion are just a bunch of rabble, despite being called a knight squad. Their loyalty to Adolf is completely unquestionable, but their individual skills are severely lacking. Apparently, this legion is made up entirely of common street criminals, whom Adolf had brainwashed with his sinister dark powers. The powerful brainwashing turned them into mindless fanatics, allowing Adolf to not only expand his sphere of influence, but also to demonstrate his control over even the most hopeless of individuals. They are now loyally and mindlessly controlled. And if Adolf were to give a single command during the succession ceremony, a true tragedy would most likely unfold, with his knights willing to go to any extreme for him. Even these street thugs are a part of this very estate, and the brainwashed high-level knights are particularly troublesome. To mitigate the risk of such blind loyalty turning against him, our hero plans to reduce the 5th Legion's overall strength as much as he possibly can before the succession ceremony, starting with the 12 high-level expert knights. He intends for them to die heroically while fighting the ogres. Kyle's role is simply to survive this deadly battle and return with the grand achievement of subjugating the ogres, thereby securing his own position and demonstrating his own value. As the potent aroma from the ogre perfume spreads across the countryside, the monstrous ogres are drawn directly to it, and soon after, the entire camp is under a full-scale attack. The soldiers are thrown into a state of utter confusion, completely unsure of what is happening. One of the high-ranked knights tries to reassure his frightened comrades, telling them not to falter because it is just a mere ogre. However, their fragile confidence is completely shattered when that very same knight is crushed like a ripe tomato under the giant, crushing hand of an ogre. The soldiers tremble and recoil in pure terror, realizing that if a high-level knight can be defeated so easily, they stand absolutely no chance against these horrific monsters. That is when Kyle leaps into the chaotic scene, urging every one of them to pull themselves together. He scolds them for cowering in fear, reminding them that the prestigious Saltarian knights do not behave in such a way. He further stresses that if they were to retreat, the ogres will surely invade their home territory, so they must stop the ogres here, no matter the ultimate cost. At that moment, Baron Jerome arrives on his mighty horseback, relieved to see that our protagonist is alive and safe. He tells Kyle to make his escape while he takes care of the monster, emphasizing that his personal safety is the top priority for him. But our hero firmly declares that he will not run. He makes it clear that he will stay and fight alongside everyone until the very end because he cannot face his brother Adolf. If he abandons his followers and runs away all alone, he asks the thin-mustached man if there is anything wrong with his personal decision. The Baron is quite touched by the bravery our protagonist is showing and looks back at him with pure admiration. That is when Kyle casts a powerful spell, giving the Baron an extra magical boost. As the spell takes full effect, the Baron feels much lighter and more invigorated. Kyle explains that since he is still a first circle mage, he will provide support and control from the backlines. He tells the Baron to take the lead and fight with bravery. Young Lord's command, his hand tightening confidently on his sword's hilt. He leaps from his steed, and a new realization dawns on him about Kyle's valor and unyielding battlefield presence. He finally understood our hero was a priceless and irreplaceable weapon for Lord Adolf, and the Baron decided he would report to him that his little brother's loyalty was absolute. With this newfound conviction, the Baron unleashes a devastating surge of his own power, causing the very earth to crack and splinter beneath his feet. He roars a challenge at the colossal ogre to face him, and launches himself directly toward the monstrous beast. The other soldiers gaze on awestruck as their commander charges forward without a single ounce of fear. Inspired by the Baron's courageous display, they realize they cannot afford to show any weakness now. Fueled by their leader's valor, they swear to follow him into the jaws of death and fight with every last bit of strength they have. Kyle delivers one final, impassioned cry, encouraging the soldiers to advance and to meet this danger with all of their might. The knights, motivated by his powerful words, surged forward into their doom without an iota of hesitation. Behind the chaos, Kyle allows a grim smirk to cross his face. His grand design was unfolding flawlessly, because although these soldiers were indeed strong, his special perfume had lured exceptionally powerful ogres, beasts 2 or 3 times more monstrous than normal. Outwardly, he continues to rally the doomed 5th Legion, but internally, a cold satisfaction washes over him, knowing this would be their final bloody battle. The soldiers are caught completely by surprise and are brutally annihilated by the enormous 2-headed giant ogres. Despite all of this horrifying carnage, the mustached Baron charges one of the ogres, his sword drawn high, his eyes burning with pure vengeance. He screams for the monster's death and swings his mighty sword with all his might as he continues to desperately battle the ogre. One of the other knights looks around and realizes with horror that most of their high-ranking knights have already been slain, with only a handful remaining. The poor soldier begins to shiver with absolute terror, wondering if he can possibly make it out of this alive, as the enemy proves to be far too powerful for them to contend with. Meanwhile, Kyle's cold smile never wavers, seeing this as his perfect chance to cull his brother's loyal knights. Initially, there had been about 12 high-ranking knights, but now a mere 3 of them remain, including the thin-mustached Baron. The Baron, too, has been pushed to his absolute limit and is now uncertain whether they can possibly achieve victory. He contemplates using his final forbidden option, the corrupting power of darkness, before he can unleash this terrifying power. Brother Adolf's chilling warning echoes in his mind. Adolf had told him that the power of darkness would make him stronger and would allow him to sense a power unlike anything he had ever felt before. But fully unleashing it would come at a terrible cost. He would be unable to revert back to his old self, transformed into a frenzied, mindless beast and losing all his humanity. Therefore, Adolf had advised him not to release this power recklessly. The thin-mustached man wrestles with a monumental decision, knowing that using this power could be his final resort in their truly desperate situation. Despite the immense danger, he resolves to unleash his dark power. He knows that while he might be able to defeat the twin-headed ogre, he won't be able to contain his ensuing rage. But losing control is still better than dying like a sacrificial lamb. However, just as he prepares to surrender to the darkness, a brilliant bolt of lightning crashes down from the sky, striking the beast and stunning it completely. It turns out that the lightning was cast by Kyle. He instructs the Baron to pierce the enemy's lines, while he provides backup from the safety of the shore. The thin-mustached man brims with admiration for our protagonist. He quickly agrees with the proposed plan, all while he feels immensely reassured that he finally does not have to resort to using his dark powers. Kyle then casts a spell known as Mind Cleansing, which rapidly heals everyone within its effective range. The thin-mustached man is both shocked and surprised by the spell's effect, as they all feel invigorated and their minds are completely clear. This powerful spell rejuvenates their resolve, reminding them that they are the 5th Legion under Adolf's command. Energized and focused, they recommence fighting the twin-headed ogre with a renewed and fierce determination. One of the elite knights strikes the monster, landing a blow right on its overgrown head. But the ogre sends him flying with a single, contemptuous slap. And with this one down, only 2 of the elite knights now remain. The monster turns around, grabs the last remaining knight, and smashes him against a nearby tree with such incredible force that nothing remains but a crimson splatter of blood. This leaves just one elite knight still alive. Baron Jerome. Kyle just smiles after seeing his plan come to fruition. You see, his primary goal was the complete eradication of the 12 elite knights, who have been empowered by Adolf's dark and sinister magic. And with 11 of them now dead, only Baron Jerome remains. The thin-mustached man trembles in sheer terror as he sees the remains of his comrades scattered all around him. Despite his overwhelming fear, he remains resolute and tells Kyle to cast that spell one more time, promising that he will soon end the life of the mutated, vile ogre. Kyle, on the other hand, just flashes his now trademark, chilling smile, and he finally casts the spell, Ensnare. And these hand-like appendages pop out of absolutely nowhere to grab the unsuspecting knight from all sides, rendering him completely unable to move. The knight is completely and utterly bewildered by his inability to move. Kyle calmly tells him to keep his eyes forward, because the ogre is now right in front of him. That is when the orc begins grinning at the sight of its helpless prey. Completely immobilized, it raises its massive hand and crushes the thin mustache man with a brutal swipe, leaving the other surviving soldiers in absolute shock and dismay. They are at a complete loss now that their senior is dead. The ogre then turns its attention toward the remaining soldiers. But before it can even act, a storm of fire hits the giant monster, burning it alive and leaving the soldiers in absolute, utter awe. The ogre slumps heavily to the ground, defeated and completely scorched. Kyle descends from the nearby hill and lands directly above the roasted body of the dead ogre. With practiced precision, he pulls out a crystal from the monster's body, which appears to be a part of an elite special unit. With his grand plan officially played out, just as he intended, he decides it is time to wrap up his little charade. He announces to everyone that the mutant ogre has finally been vanquished, and he gives all the credit to the Baron's heroic sacrifice, which gave Kyle the perfect opportunity to strike and defeat the monster. He also praises the 12 valiant knights who fought so selflessly. As the sun rises, Kyle concludes his rousing speech, saying they have finally succeeded and have lived to see another day. At first, everyone is wide-eyed and unsure of how they should react, but soon, they begin to beam with happiness at their hard-earned victory. They celebrate with their hands raised high in the air, reveling in their triumph. As the party begins their journey back toward the mansion, our protagonist reflects on the noteworthy success of the subjugation, the extermination of the mutated 2-headed ogre, along with the original goal of annihilating the entire goblin tribe, was a very significant achievement. However, it had come at a heavy cost, and the sacrifices were not small. Once they finally arrive at the mansion, Brother Adolf is completely shocked and quickly asks if Baron Jerome is actually dead. Kyle somberly responds that the Baron fought the mutated ogre to the death, and without his fierce and final battle, no one, including Kyle himself, would have possibly survived. Devastated by the tragic news, Adolf pulls back the curtains, covering the dead body of his most loyal and trusted subordinate. He is indeed shocked to see that Baron Jerome is dead. But what troubles him even more is that it appears the Baron had not tapped into the power of darkness. The loss of the Baron, Jerome, and the high-level expert knights is a painful blow to Adolf, and it drives him into a silent, furious rage, though he doesn't dare to voice his anger directly. Instead, he pretends to be genuinely concerned and expresses his relief that his little brother is still alive. He acknowledges that Kyle's victory over the mutated ogre is commendable and says he will inform their father and ensure he is properly rewarded for his impressive achievements. The junior brother responds with a broad, knowing smile and thanks Adolf for his kind words. As they finally begin to enter the grand mansion, Kyle smirks to himself, wondering if he has truly succeeded in deceiving his big brother. Night falls, and we find our protagonist hanging out with his knight and his maid, looking quite pleased with himself. He is narrating how he managed to kill 2 birds with a single stone. He weakened the 5th Legion's overall strength and gained Brother Adolf's favor. Plus, he managed to snag the core of the mutated ogre, which will be super useful for treating his Hernimum. Well, come to think of it, it's more like hitting 3 birds with 1 stone. Anyway, Leon Hart is relieved that he made it back to them safely, but he notes that it was pretty dangerous. Kind of shrugs it off, saying that 1 mutated ogre was no big deal for him, and he is sure that he could have handled it without even breaking a sweat. He simply wanted to pretend to be much weaker, to show everyone that he is just a harmless little kid. Leon Hart then asks if he plans to stick with Brother Adolf's camp, and what his plans are for Lord Abel. Kyle just smiles in response and tells him to simply wait and watch, confident that his brother Abel will come looking for him on his own. A few days later, the major members of the powerful Sultarian family gather in the main conference room to review the results of the recent subjugation and decide how to distribute the spoils of war. During the heated discussion, the Marquis mentions he wants to talk about Kyle's role in the massive ogre's defeat and opens the floor for any potential objections. There is a murmur of surprise and sheer disbelief among the family members, who find it hard to believe that Kyle was even involved in defeating the fearsome monster at all. On the other hand, Adolf sits there with a smug smile on his face, already plotting to keep Kyle firmly on his side. One of the members in the conference room finally raises their hand, pointing out that Kyle's supposed significant role in the recent hunting party sounds like a bit of a stretch. This particular critic is Baron Hemington, a rather portly figure known for his extreme bluntness. The Marquis asks him for clarification, and Baron Hemington responds that, while it is well known how much the Marquis adores his youngest son and often praises him, the reality of the situation is that Kyle is just a first-circle magician, essentially an apprentice who is new to the ways of magic. Considering the trouble our protagonist has caused in the past, Hemington argues that merely participating in the subjugation and returning safely does not warrant credit for the monster's defeat. It is hard to believe that someone could mature so quickly overnight and play such a truly pivotal role. He also goes on to highlight that Kyle has always been a very troublesome child. Up until now, the other family members seem to nod along, clearly worried about what kind of mischief Kyle might be cooking up. Now, Kyle, meanwhile, is somewhat fascinated by the fact that these loudmouths have no qualms about speaking so ill of him, right in his presence. It seems the original Kyle is living up to his reputation as a troublesome kid, which isn't too surprising. At that moment, Kyle himself decides to finally speak up. He addresses the Baron directly, pointing out that he was present when the mutated ogres were rampaging, and simply surviving and witnessing such a horrific event is an achievement in and of itself. He urges the Baron to reconsider his flawed opinion, emphasizing that only someone who has faced a monster like that firsthand can truly understand the pure terror. He further challenges the portly man by asking if he thinks dealing with such a threat is as easy as it sounds. Of course, Baron Hemington is visibly startled by our protagonist's challenging tone as he stumbles for a proper response. Lord Abel also speaks up. He points out that even regular ogres are tough to deal with, even for several high-level expert knights, considering the ogre Kyle faced was a two-headed one, twice as strong as a regular ogre. The fact that Kyle returned alive is indeed nothing short of a miracle. Our protagonist feels a bit bewildered to see his oldest brother defending him, which is a rare show of support. On the other hand, Baron Hemington tries to counter by arguing that Kyle's survival was due to the knights, risking their lives to protect him. He emphasizes that all 12 high-level expert knights had died, which clearly suggests that Kyle's survival was more a matter of pure luck and the sacrifices of the others, rather than his own individual prowess. Lord Abel speaks up once again and stresses the fact that the blow that killed the mutated ogre was delivered by Kyle's own spell, as confirmed by the surviving knights. He acknowledges that while Kyle may have been a troublemaker during his early childhood, he still made significant contributions in this recent subjugation and is now focused on studying magic with great diligence. Abel argues that it will be fair for Baron Hemington to set aside his prejudice and recognize Kyle's recent achievements. The portly man tries to argue further, but Adolf cuts him off with a raised, commanding voice, asking if he truly believes he has the right to bring up Kyle's past misdeeds and criticize a direct descendant of the Sultarians over such baseless claims. Adolf then questions if he is trying to overstep his own authority. This causes Hemington to shrink back in pure terror, quickly denying any such intention. Meanwhile, Kyle, the man of the hour, is utterly bewildered by what has happened. Both of his brothers are actually defending him. Adolf finally calms down, clears his throat, and turns to their father, declaring that his vote is in Kyle's favor. He fully recognizes his little brother's recent achievements and insists they must be properly acknowledged. He reminds his father that the 5th Legion is directly under his personal command, and all of the boys had testified that his young brother fought bravely. With both Abel and Adolf in complete agreement, their father delivers the final, decisive verdict. If both of his brothers agree, then there are no objections to acknowledging Kyle's contribution. The Marquis declares that from this moment on, Kyle is officially free to come and go from the main residence, and he may even leave the entire estate. Our protagonist lights up with happiness at hearing his father's verdict. However, his father goes on to say that the spoils recovered from the mutated ogre will be distributed based on merit, and that Kyle will not receive any of it. This catches our protagonist completely off guard, as he was not expecting to be cut out just like that. With those final, impactful words, His father adjourns the meeting, and everyone is allowed to leave. But Kyle stands there, completely bewildered by the last part of his father's final verdict. He has no idea why, despite being acknowledged for his valuable contributions, he isn't getting any of the spoils. Before his father departs, Kyle quickly calls out to him, trying to charm him with his innocent and pure expression, and asks if he's really not going to get any of the spoils. After all of his hard work, that is when his father leans closer to his son's ear and whispers about the precious ogre core that Kyle had already swiped. As soon as his father's whispered words fully sink in, Kyle's breath catches in his throat. He quickly responds, saying he doesn't need the spoils anyway, and that just having his house arrest finally lifted is more than enough of a reward for him. Then, from behind, Adolf calls out to him. When Kyle turns around, his big brother reminds him that he had kept his promise of informing their father about his achievements, adding that he did it all out of love for his dear little brother. Kyle, however, can see right through the hollow flattery, knowing exactly where Adolf's words are truly coming from. Meanwhile, Abel is also standing off in the far distance, quietly reflecting on how much Kyle has changed in just a few short days. He is definitely looking forward to meeting his little brother all alone. It seems our protagonist's prediction has come true after all. In the next scene, we see Abel and Kyle catching up. Right off the bat, Abel drops a bombshell of a piece of news, claiming that he doesn't actually possess any serious special skills, and this is the first time he has ever mentioned it to anyone. Not even their powerful father knows. Kyle just goes along with the flow of conversation, but in his head he is thinking, why is my brother suddenly dropping these secret bombs like this? Kyle had been fully ready to talk with Abel, but he did not expect the conversation to take such an unexpected turn. Before we dive any further, let's rewind things back a bit. Right after the meeting had ended, Abel approached our protagonist and personally gave props for the hard work he had put into this recent subjugation. He points out that Kyle has now successfully proven himself in a real combat situation, so he confidently gives the title of a proper mage to our protagonist. Kyle, however, downplays it modestly, saying he is still far from that prestigious title. After all, he is only a simple first circle mage, and he chalks his entire success up to sheer dumb luck. Once Abel takes firm control of the conversation, he promptly invites his little brother to join him for dinner, saying he would love to hear more about his exploits during the subjugation. At the time, our protagonist had agreed with a smile, but now, sitting across from his older brother, he knows the real reason for this impromptu invitation, which is that his big brother is trying to recruit him to his own side. But what our protagonist can't seem to figure out is why his big brother is suddenly dropping such a personal secret. There doesn't seem to be any ill intent, but he is still struggling to understand what Abel is truly trying to achieve by revealing something so incredibly private. Whatever the case may be, our hero's mind is also on the bigger picture. If he wants to safely navigate the Marquisate of Celtarian rebellion event, Abel's strength needs to grow as Adolf's influence begins to crumble. Only with solid support from the Marquisate of Celtarian will Kyle have a real chance to survive this deadly fantasy chess game. So he knows he has to be very careful with his words here. With that in mind, he turns to his big brother and asks why he's revealing such a truly significant secret, one that not even their powerful father knows about. Abel responds by asking if his little brother isn't interested in hearing the full story. First, our protagonist admits that he would love to hear what his senior has to say, but after learning such a big secret, he is unsure how to react and what Abel truly thinks of him. The senior quickly picks up on Kyle's obvious concern and directly asks if he is worried that there might be ulterior motives behind revealing such truly crucial information. Kyle sheepishly smiles and kind of agrees to what his brother had said. He further admits that he simply cannot win against his big brother in these games of wits, so he decides to be completely straightforward. He makes it clear that while he is currently aligned with Adolf, he does not truly support him. However, this does not mean he plans to join Abel's side either. The scene then transitions to the practice grounds of the Grand Mansion, where we find Adolf venting his frustrations on the training dummies. Clearly agitated, one of the maids stands nearby, watching him with a mix of concern and deep apprehension. His frustration, apparently, becomes evident as he expresses his intense irritation that his eldest brother had visited Kyle's residence. The maid further confirms this and adds that there were guards stationed outside, so she was unable to overhear their private conversation. Adolf states that he already knows why Abel wanted to meet with Kyle and what they had discussed. He makes it abundantly clear that he was the first to set his sights on our protagonist and is not going to lose him to Abel so easily. He then instructs the maid to poison Kyle's food if he ever shows any signs of considering joining Abel, emphasizing that this is precisely why she was stationed there. The lady looks anxious and scared by these stern orders, but reluctantly agrees to carry out the terrible task. The scene shifts back to Kyle and Abel's private meeting, when the senior asks him why he isn't interested in joining his side. Our protagonist hesitates to respond. Well, we all just saw what Adolf is now plotting against our protagonist if he joins Abel's side, so it is no surprise that he does not want to join. But he does not say anything to Abel regarding this. Instead, he surprises him by saying Abel is a very kind person. Well, this unexpected response catches the senior completely off guard, while our protagonist keeps saying how kind his eldest brother is. Apparently, Kyle's words are completely genuine, especially considering his system shows that Abel's affection level toward him is at 0. This is actually a very positive sign, given that most people have negative scores in affection toward our protagonist. Abel, on the other hand, admits he is glad to hear such very kind words. However, he also feels deeply regretful for not paying attention to his younger brother and only coming around when he needed something. Kyle reassures him in his response, saying he should not feel guilty. He acknowledges his own bratty behavior in the past and admits he also dislikes his own former self. He is just glad that his senior brother did not just bury him for being a simple brat, and he is truly thankful for that. Abel bursts into a hearty laughter when he hears the funny remark from his junior. He jokes that if he had known his little brother was so smart and so perceptive, he would have met with him sooner. Then, Abel gets serious and tells Kyle that whatever Adolf has promised him, Abel can offer the very same and even better. He asks him if there is any chance for a reconsideration. Our protagonist finally speaks up, saying that if he joins Adolf, he is sure that Abel would not hold a grudge. But if he joins Abel instead, Adolf would be absolutely ruthless and might even try to kill him. He further explains that Adolf is genuinely and truly merciless and would go to any lengths to eliminate him if he ever becomes a hindrance. He adds that he just barely got through a difficult trial, and as a mere first circle mage, is not strong enough to defend himself if Adolf decides to target him. Our protagonist doubts he would even stand chance. Abel remains completely quiet upon hearing this extreme evaluation. He notes that our protagonist is the only family member who has ever expressed such a strong opinion about Adolf. When Kyle asks if he agrees with this brutal assessment, Abel simply nods his head in confirmation. Before diving deeper into their important conversation, Abel finally reveals that his seemingly insignificant skill is actually a form of keen intuition. He explains that since his early childhood, he has always had a nagging feeling when something bad was about to happen. This powerful intuition has helped him avoid dangerous situations. However, as they approach the dreaded succession ceremony, these ominous feelings have greatly intensified, especially concerning Adolf, who is now giving off some seriously dangerous vibes. Abel admits, though, that he does not have any concrete proof to confirm any ill intentions from Adolf, so he cannot be entirely sure. This revelation kind of fascinates our protagonist. He starts to wonder if Abel is actually aware of what has happened around him. What is surprising is that this level of insight should be just a low-level foresight. But Abel also seems to be able to sense dark energy, and he never possessed that ability in the original game. It makes him question what is truly going on. Could it be that since he entered this game world, just as Kyle himself developed new abilities, other NPCs might have also undergone changes? He remembers how Ursil, who was supposed to be a minor character, has developed an innate and powerful talent for spirit magic. Anyway, Abel speaks up again, saying that even though Adolf is his younger brother and second in line for the Marquis, their father does not think he will cross any dangerous lines, even if he gets a bit too extreme. Abel is just trying to stay cautious because of this ominous feeling he has about Adolf. He admits that this much is not enough to convince the others, which is why he has kept it a complete secret. Our protagonist points out that if brother Adolf becomes the successor of the Marquis of Celtarian, the whole place will fall into absolute chaos, and none of them will be safe. Abel seems to get the inherent logic behind this, so he asks Kyle if he really has a solid plan. Our protagonist finally reveals that he is going to pretend to be on Adolf's side. For now, keep a close eye on his movements and act like a loyal follower to make him drop his guard. Then, he will take his chance. Abel then highlights that this does not look as simple as it sounds. Kyle explains that is exactly why he needs some help and asks his senior brother if he would be willing to support him. Abel is momentarily surprised, but quickly recovers and then chuckles, while saying How can I refuse my adorable little brother's request like that? He agrees to support Kyle from the safety of the shadows. With that settled, our guy says he has one special favor to ask. But before we can hear about that particular favor, the scene transitions to give us a look at the Grand Mansion. A few days have now passed since the conversation with his brother. Inside Kyle's room, we see a giant pile of platinum coins. Leon Hart gasps in complete shock as he claims that just one of these valuable coins is worth several times his entire monthly salary. He asks Kyle how he managed to get so much money. Our protagonist cheekily replies that he stole it from his older brother. If this vast fortune was extorted from Abel, Kyle confirms with a sly grin as reality shifts, rewinding to a scene from days prior. There, we witness Kyle boldly requesting a monumental sum of money from his brother. Abel, without a moment's pause, inquires about the amount required, vowing to arrange the funds for him immediately. He dismisses it as a mere token of affection for his cherished younger brother, a gift with no expectation of ever being repaid. In the present, our protagonist gleefully admits he never realized the true depths of his older brother's generosity. Amidst all the glittering gold, Leon Hart's sharp eyes spot a radiant, glowing sphere within the pile of coins, and he inquisitively asks his master what it is. Kyle clarifies that it is a personal communication or a direct gift from his brother, so they can always remain in contact. The stoic knight finds this utterly absurd and points out that these artifacts are so ludicrously expensive. He could easily purchase a sprawling mansion with a garden for the very same amount. Kyle acknowledges the incredible value of these rare items, but corrects his knight, stating that the orb is a simplified version, as it can only be used for direct communication between them. The knight then looks over at Kyle, seeing the genuine happiness on his face, and deduces that his secret talks with Lord Abel must have gone exceptionally well. Kyle confirms that their meeting did indeed go well, and that his older brother is truly a remarkably good person. He then offers the entire fortune to Leon Hart, saying he can keep it as he will surely need it sooner. Leon Hart asks what he plans to do with all of this money, since they had already finished renovating the entire workshop and had recently purchased new magic and spirit stones, so they shouldn't require more money for quite some time. Kyle declares he intends to make even more money with this sum, and that this is merely his initial investment capital. In the next moment, we get a vibrant panel showing Ursil channeling her spirit magic as she intones her powerful spell. Padaki begins to erupt like a miniature sun in the sky, leaving Ursil completely bewildered by this unexpected phenomenon. She had originally meant for her simple staff to glow, but instead, Padaki itself answered her powerful chant. While Padaki snuggles contentedly up on Kyle's head, the girl shouts at it to stop climbing onto his head, but our protagonist reassures her that it is totally fine, and even jokes that it's like having a convenient headlamp. Leon Hart, ever the simplest of guys, just face bombs in pure frustration and quickly asks what they're doing inside this dungeon right now. Well, this is actually a very good question, and I also want to know what exactly they're doing down here. But our hero remains infuriatingly vague when asked about their activities, simply stating they're in a dungeon because it is a dungeon. Leon Hart, clearly becoming annoyed, demands a much clearer answer from him. He reminds Kyle that they had departed from the mansion with the stated intention of visiting the neighboring territory of Empelon. So he wants to know why they're now deep inside a dungeon. Kyle continues to be completely evasive, explaining that there happens to be a dungeon on the way to Empelon, and since they were just passing by, they decided they should take a quick look. Once again, Leon Hart is frustrated with his master's vague responses. He decides to give up on asking, and simply states that they should get out of this dungeon, since it is not a place for them to stay for long. Kyle counters, declaring that their exploration of the dungeon is only just beginning. Leon Hart stubbornly reminds him that it is far too dangerous. He points out that as they have progressed deeper into the cave, the number of monsters has steadily and surely decreased. This likely means that a powerful boss monster resides further inside, as low and mid-level monsters tend to avoid boss territories. Leon Hart reveals that he has managed to handle things up until now, but he is unsure what challenges they might face if they continue. He insists they should turn back around while they still have the chance. That is when Kyle makes it clear that they are not turning back, because the boss is exactly what they are here for. Leon Hart is completely shocked by his master's stunning revelation and asks if leaving the house under the pretense of going to Empel was all just a clever cover. Kyle responds that it was not entirely incorrect, as they do have some legitimate business in Empel. However, he explains that he happened to know there was a hidden dungeon on the way. If he had mentioned this from the very start, that they were going to go and explore the dungeon, I would not have been able to leave the house all alone. Twice as many guards would have surely followed them. He is certain that his second brother's spies and his older brother's guards would have. accompanied him as well, which is not a good thing at all. It would have been impossible to explore this dungeon with such a large crowd, and if a fight had happened to break out among them, everyone would have been caught right in the middle of it. Additionally, there are also issues with Ursil, since Ursil is currently training in spirit magic, which Kyle wishes to keep a complete secret. He has only informed his father about it, and does not want his brothers to know about it just yet. Therefore, bringing Padaki out in front of other people would be problematic. He then addresses the large elephant in the room, revealing that the biggest issue of all is sharing the loot. If they were to bring more people, but Leon Hart points out that with just the 3 of them is quite reckless. He acknowledges that he might be an upper-ranked expert knight, but Ursil has only just recently begun learning spirit magic. While the knight continues his strong protest, Kyle finally speaks up with a fiery tone that leaves the knight stunned and completely silent. Kyle reminds him that just because he acted weak back in a mansion, it does not mean he should take it at its face value. The power of his magic, which has overcome her Mamu, is drastically different from that of regular magic, and Leon Hart himself is a living witness to that. With that in mind, Kyle asks him if he still has any hesitation. He emphasizes that they have a very solid team. Leon Hart as their powerful tank, Ursil as their healer, and himself as the DPS. With everything they need in place, our hero sees no reason why they should not explore the dungeon. For one last time, he tells his knight to stop underestimating his own master, and to show some faith and trust. He then challenges Leon Hart by asking if he still has any doubts as to whom he would choose to be loyal, his father or Kyle. Before Leon Hart can even respond, Kyle makes it very clear that he doesn't need a knight who serves 2 different masters. He wants a knight who serves him and him alone. This puts Leon Hart in quite a difficult dilemma, and he hesitates to give an answer. Well, our protagonist understands. The hesitation comes from the fact that Leon Hart is only here, as per the Marquis's own orders, to guard his son, no matter how loyally he serves Kyle. His one true master is the Marquis. Our protagonist has realized that simply showing some sentiment will not be enough to secure Leon Hart's absolute loyalty, and forcing him would only backfire severely. The fact that Leon Hart even hesitates reassures Kyle that the knight, at least, acknowledges him as a master worth considering. With that settled, they continue their journey deeper into the dark dungeon. Leon Hart, with a renewed and fierce conviction, swears to be the impenetrable shield of Ursil. As they step confidently into the main boss chamber, they find a massive creature sitting there quietly. The room is revealed to be the Minotaur's secret and hidden sanctuary, the name of the dungeon itself. Kyle notices that the Minotaur is much larger than he had expected, especially since, in Fantasy Defense, this dungeon was known as a beginner's farming spot. It had no traps, a very short path, very few mobs, and most importantly, the rewards were incredibly generous compared to its overall difficulty. This is exactly why he had kept the party so small, because he is not about to share such a treasure with anyone else. Leon Hart then reveals that the Minotaur is said to be 3 times stronger than an ogre. Kyle agrees, pointing out that while the Minotaur does not use any magic, it has truly incredible strength. If Leon Hart tries to block its giant hammer without using his sword energy, his bones could very easily shatter. Kyle instructs him to take the very front line, draw the Minotaur's aggro, and block its powerful hammer attacks. He promises to cast a powerful shield spell to boost Leon Hart's defenses. With the added shield and his own sword energy, Leon Hart should be able to withstand the beast's heavy attacks. However, Kyle warns that there is one attack to be especially cautious of. When the Minotaur becomes enraged and charges like a wild bull, it initiates a deadly whirlwind attack. Kyle advises Leon Hart to dodge this particular attack entirely, because even the strongest of shields will not hold up against it. He suggests luring the Minotaur to the chamber's outskirts, while dodging its attacks as much as he possibly can. Once the Minotaur's whirlwind attack has stopped, the monster will be completely exhausted and dazed, and that is when Leon Hart should unleash his powerful attack. Leon Hart acknowledges the detailed instructions, and Kyle then turns to Ursil. He tells her to cast buffs on him and Leon Hart before the battle begins. Since this is her very first real fight, he suggests that if she gets too scared, she should hide behind a large rock. However, Ursil confidently replies that she is not scared. But the real issue is that she has not yet fully mastered spirit magic. Despite that, she is determined to support Kyle and to show the results of her training. Kyle is quite impressed by her firm resolve and agrees to let her join the battlefield, but warns her not to overdo it. He advises her to always maintain a safe distance and to retreat if she feels like the situation is getting too dangerous. He further explains to her that as the party's primary healer and buffer, her most important role is not protecting him, but ensuring her own personal safety. He reminds her that as long as she stays safe, they will have plenty of chances to eventually succeed. In essence, she now holds both his and Leon Hart's lives in her hands. Ursil is quite moved to realize how our protagonist is putting so much faith in her, which makes her blush as she promises to carry out her assigned tasks. Leon Hart, on the other hand, stands quietly and could not help but to notice how much Kyle truly knows, from the location of this hidden dungeon to the true importance of a healer and the specific strategies required to defeat the powerful Minotaur. These are things one only learns through actual, real experience. Leon Hart cannot resist asking Kyle directly how he seems so knowledgeable about these dungeon raids, despite this being his very first time entering one. Kyle is caught completely off guard by his knight's probing question and struggles to come up with a truly convincing response. He mentally curses himself for acting like he knows far too much, forgetting that he is supposed to be a 13-year-old kid. He realizes that despite any magical genius he might possibly have, it would be unusual for someone his age to have such extensive and detailed knowledge about dungeon raids. Eventually, he comes up with a plausible excuse, claiming he had learned some basic tips during the recent goblin hunt when dealing with the mutated ogre. Leon Hart finds this explanation very hard to believe, questioning how Kyle could have learned about the Minotaur's specific traits and attack patterns from knights who were struggling with simple ogres. Well, it seems like our protagonist is not getting anywhere with his lame responses. He is unsure why his knight is pressing him with so many questions and fears that Leon Hart might be very close to discovering that he is not the real Kyle. He imagines a horrific nightmare scenario where Leon Hart stands up in front of everyone and announces that this is not Kyle, but a dangerous imposter. Chaos then erupts, and our protagonist can practically hear the entire crowd cheering as they pummel him with everything they have got. Then he pictures himself all tied up in front of his senior brothers, who are completely convinced that this brat must be possessed by a demon. They have been suspicious from the very start, especially since he has changed so much in just a few days. The idea of being burned alive sends horrifying shivers down his spine. So he quickly blurts out that he had read about it in a book. The knight still looks very unsure and is trying to piece it all together, but Kyle tries to convince him that it is indeed true, mentioning that he spent a lot of time in the library and, oh yeah, he might have secretly read some complex strategy books too. The knight is totally baffled, but then his entire expression shifts. He starts to admire his young master again, saying that it all now makes perfect sense. He points out how Kyle has been hitting the library often lately, studying like a man on a mission. He is impressed that his master did not just learn magic, but also got the hang of complex monster strategies. Leon Hart is feeling incredibly proud watching his master grow. He is practically buzzing with excitement to report back to the Marquis, sure that he will be thrilled with his youngest son's incredible progress. Meanwhile, as they chat, Kyle notices his affinity with Leon Hart rising. Whatever the case may be, it is a small but significant victory for him. After all, he was just about to get himself screwed and barely save himself from getting himself killed. Later on, we see Ursil in action. She casts a healing spell, and tiny spirits rush towards Kyle, instantly beginning their important work. Her magic boosts his health and defense by 30%, enhances both his mana and his sword energy, and restores lost health while providing automatic healing. Over time, our protagonist can't help but to compliment Ursil on how much her spirit magic has truly improved. It is clear that she has gotten a lot better since she first learned. With that, the trio is finally ready to take on the fearsome Minotaur. While the giant monster is still sleeping, Leon Hart charges in. But the Minotaur wakes up and swings its massive weapon, just as Leon Hart is about to land strike. After a brief but intense clash, the knight steps back to a safe distance and notices how much more solid and lighter his own body feels, thanks to Kyle's powerful shield and Ursil's useful buffs. The Minotaur, now fully awake and completely furious, lets out a truly massive roar. It demands to know who these intruders are and why they would dare to disturb its sacred slumber. With a menacing growl, it threatens to smash everyone into little pieces if they are here to steal its precious treasures. But the Minotaur's loud mouth is quickly shut up by Kyle's crystal attack, but it only tickles the massive beast, which just makes it even more annoyed. Kyle just stands there with a smug grin on his face, letting the Minotaur know that the real party has only just begun. He then unleashes his devastating ice lance, but the Minotaur blocks the attack with its own massive weapon and growls in pure irritation. Leon Hart sees his chance and lands a solid slash right near the Minotaur's throat, making blood pour out like a leaky old shower. Kyle is totally pumped up to see his knight in action and could not help but admire how badass his knight truly looks. Our hero then cheekily tells the Minotaur that Leon Hart is far more capable than he could possibly realize. The Minotaur grows even more annoyed to hear this and lifts its giant weapon to crush Leon Hart. But Kyle uses his stone shield just in time to block the powerful attack. The poor knight, on the other hand, trembles under the Minotaur's massive weapon, thinking he was just a hair's breadth away from having his bones completely crushed. He is thankful that Kyle used the shield spell at the perfect moment. Otherwise, his arms would have been shattered beyond all repair. What really blows his mind is Kyle's ability to predict every single move and cast his spells at just the right and perfect moment, seamlessly leading the entire battle. Kyle's battlefield instincts and his spell casting are truly top-notch, and he has everything under his control. Our hero then casts another spell that strangles the powerful Minotaur, making it unable to even move. He follows this up with a devastating barrage of light bullets that hit the monster's overgrown and powerful body. The Minotaur roars in pure agony from the sizzling hot shots, while Kyle stands there like a total gigachad. Both Ursil and Leon Hart are left utterly bewildered by his incredible display of pure skill. Even a Minotaur can't help but give a nod to Kyle's mad skills. He is seriously impressed that a mere human has pushed him this far. But don't get it twisted, he still has a grudge against all humans and views them as nothing more than simple ants. He decides it is now time to show who is the boss and starts to prepare his ultimate attack, the whirlwind. The air all around him starts to churn as he swings his axe with fury. Kyle quickly warns his party members that crap is about to get real. He tells Leon Hart to keep the Minotaur's undivided attention and lead it to the outskirts of the large battlefield. Leon Hart, ever the diligent and loyal knight, takes off like a powerful shot, while Kyle makes sure to boost his knight's valuable defenses, readying him for the powerful storm that is about to hit. As Leon Hart gets closer to the giant Minotaur, he throws his sword at the beast from safe distance. The Minotaur roars in pure anger, his rage reaching new heights as he charges after Leon Hart, who runs toward the outskirts, exactly as they had planned. It is a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, with Kyle and his team playing their parts to pure perfection. Our protagonist starts a countdown from 30, and as he does, we flash back to his earlier advice to Leon Hart, which is to avoid the Minotaur's devastating whirlwind attack, and not to face it head-on. After such a massive ability, the Minotaur would be completely exhausted and would need a moment to catch its breath, and that is when they can finally strike back. Back in the present. There are only 5 seconds left before the Minotaur completely exhausts itself. Those 5 seconds feel like a whole eternity, as the monster almost brings its giant weapon, crashing down hard on Leon Hart, just as the final second ticks away. Leon Hart narrowly dodges the powerful attack, escaping by just a hair's breadth. He is absolutely terrified, amazed at how close he had come to being hit by that massive weapon, though he is also glad that his close call had paid off. He is left wondering if it was all just a simple coincidence, or if Kyle had timed it all perfectly from the very start. Our hero then quickly uses another powerful spell, summoning ice crystals that show the full extent of his magic's raw power. After throwing the crystals at the powerful Minotaur, the beast is finally defeated, leaving behind only its giant, powerful weapon. After the battle is now officially over, Ursil is hard at work, patching up Leon Hart's injured hand, and once he is healed, he thanks her for her timely support. Meanwhile, Kyle is over the moon about the treasure left behind, thrilled to claim it all for himself. The treasure pile is packed with very valuable loot, starting with a staff that radiates an aggressive, powerful aura. This staff not only allows for slightly faster magic use, but can also store up to 3 different spells. Stored spells can be used without consuming any mana, and have a maximum spell circle of a second. Kyle explains that in fantasy defense, acquiring this powerful staff from the Minotaur dungeon is an essential strategy for all mages, offering powerful benefits until one becomes a high-circle mage. He is thrilled that this staff means he will not have to worry about his weaponry for a while. Leon Hart, meanwhile, eyes a special sword he found among the treasure. At first glance, he can tell that it is clearly a high-quality blade with magical properties. No wonder the Minotaur was so protective of it. As he looks at the massive treasure, his mind flashes back to the proposition our protagonist threw toward him, which was about pledging his loyalty, whether to the Marquis or to Kyle himself. Leon Hart is feeling very guilty that he is being rewarded with such generosity from his young master, even though he cannot even get himself to pledge his loyalty to him. Ursil is also feeling a pang of guilt for always receiving these things from Kyle. She admits she wants to be of more help to him, even if just a little, but she is unsure how she could ever repay him if she accepts such valuable and precious loot. Kyle reassures her not to feel that way, emphasizing how much both she and Leon Hart have contributed to today's difficult battle. But still, Leon Hart agrees with Ursil, saying that the sword is far too precious for him to ever use. Kyle sighs at their shared absurdity and tells them that the equipment is not just a simple reward. He expects them to get much stronger with this high-grade gear. He stresses that they need to enhance their combat power urgently, as they're very short on time. This new equipment is meant to help them significantly boost their abilities for the many challenges that lie ahead. He also acknowledges the rules about reporting and distributing high-grade dungeon rewards through the proper channels. But he admits he does not intend to follow them this time around. He wants to keep their newfound strength and the treasure's secrets from the rest of the entire family. He tells Ursil and Leon Hart that they're the only ones he can truly and fully trust right now. He urges them to take the powerful artifacts, improve their own abilities, and be of help to him in the face of the looming darkness in the Saltarian family. He emphasizes that becoming stronger is crucial for their survival. After this very serious conversation, Kyle decides it is time to start their journey to Influence. His both friends acknowledge his words with a positive attitude, ready to embark on their journey and face the many challenges ahead. A few days later, at the Influence mansion in the Breadbasket region, chaos erupts when Count Frantel Neuron, the Lord of Influence, discovers that the Saltarian Marquis family has arrived completely unannounced. In a state of pure shock, Frantel is shouting and rushing down the stairs, frantic to find out whether it is the first or the second son who has shown up. His personal assistant, a bespectacled man, explains that he is not entirely sure, but they carry the powerful Saltarian crest, which only direct descendants of the family can ever possess. Frantel is totally and completely freaking out, wondering if the Saltarians are now considered, dragging his entire domain into their families. Succession drama. His assistant is also worrying about the exact same thing, and further points out that it is an unwritten rule to avoid involving any other families in succession disputes, but it seems they are caught up in it now. When they finally reach the main guest room, Count Frantel Neuron pauses for a moment to regain his formal demeanor. He opens the door with a broad, fake smile, ready to warmly welcome his esteemed guests from the powerful Saltarian family. But his greeting gets caught in his throat when he sees Kyle, sitting comfortably in the lavish guest room, sipping tea and enjoying some of the delicacies. When Kyle sees the lord of the mansion, he promptly greets the lord and apologizes for the complete lack of any advance notice. Frantel, on the other hand, exclaims in shock, asking who the hell even this boy is. But a real shocker comes to Frantel when he realizes that Kyle is the same good-for-nothing fourth son of the great Saltarian family. He is so shocked that he even blurts this line out loud. But he quickly tries to cover his reaction with his hand as Leon Hart, right beside Kyle, shoots him a glare that clearly says he is not impressed with the Lord's lack of any decorum in front of his young master. Our protagonist tries to diffuse the tension by saying it is all good and tells the Lord to just chill out. He admits he was a huge troublemaker until very recently, but says he has had a major change of heart ever since he had recovered himself from Hermimum. He has been reflecting on his past and wants to do much better. Frantel is surprised by this shocking news and asks if he really has overcome his terrible illness. Our protagonist confirms, saying he is now forming a group to practice his magic and hopes it will greatly benefit the family. Frantel is struggling to process all of this because he remembers the youngest as a completely hopeless troublemaker, and he was the kind of kid that even the Saltarian family had given up on. But seeing him now, he realizes he is different from the many rumors. His eyes show absolutely no sign of confusion. He is also very polite, and his posture is completely impeccable. Not to mention, our protagonist even has the admirable intention of helping the family, which leads Frantel to believe that the bad rumors he had heard about him must have been completely false. He beams with pure happiness as he realizes that Kyle is actually a very good guy, contrary to what all the rumors had said. He then points out how proud our protagonist's father must be with his youngest son. And the reason for his father's happiness is that, in generations of just swordsmen, our hero is the only one who has managed to produce any magic, making the future of the Saltarian Marquis family look incredibly bright. With the pleasantries now aside, Frantel gets back to the business at hand. He is certain that Kyle did not come all the way to Infellor just for a simple, casual visit. So he asks what brings him to his town. Kyle smirks at first, apologizes for the unannounced and sudden visit, and explains that the Marquis family is in a very sensitive situation regarding a succession issue. He did not want to draw any attention to his movements, so he did not try to announce his own arrival. The real reason for his visit is that he wants to purchase a large quantity of grain from Infellor, which is the largest granary in the entire north. This greatly surprises Frantel, who points out that they're already trading grain. regularly with the entire Saltarian family. So, he wonders if Kyle is looking to make an additional purchase. Our hero confirms this, explaining that the grain is for his own personal use and is separate from their regular arrangement. He wants it for his magical research and cannot go into details right now. He also mentions that this will not be a one-time deal. From his knowledge of the future, he knew that Felrum territory was currently blessed with bountiful harvests. This created a massive surplus of grain, a blessing that had become a burden they struggled to manage. And so, he moved to acquire this very surplus for his grand design. With a crisp snap of his fingers, Kyle gave the signal, and his loyal knight stepped forward into the light. The knight revealed a case containing a dazzling handful of pure platinum coins. Although the quantity of coins appeared deceptively small, the sight left both Frantel and his aide utterly staggered and breathless. Their jaws hung open, their minds reeling as they tried to comprehend the scene. How could a boy so young command such an astronomical fortune? Lord Frantel, a seasoned nobleman, quickly composed his expression. He declared that parting with the old grain would pose no significant problem. He confirmed their warehouses were indeed filled with excess stock. Recognizing that the world of magical research is shrouded in secrecy, he vowed he would not pry further into the young lord's work. A pleased smile graced Kyle's face, glad to be dealing with a man like Frantel. However, the lord's curiosity flared, asking how such a young individual managed to acquire such a staggering amount of capital for this venture. After all, transactions with shadowy origins could spell immense trouble, especially when the buyer was a mere boy in appearance. Our protagonist calmly reassured him, explaining the funds were a gift from his brother. When Frantel inquired if he was referring to the renowned Abel, Kyle affirmed it without hesitation, declaring that Abel was the only one he would ever call his elder brother. Of course, this revelation only deepened Frantel's delight and solidified his trust in Kyle. The fact that a prodigy like Abel would entrust his younger brother with a fortune of that magnitude spoke volumes. It was a testament to their incredibly strong fraternal bond. He quickly calculated that an alliance with Kyle and Abel was far more valuable than any potential ties to their third brother, the notorious Adolf, a man whose reputation was stained by sinister intentions. With this new understanding, he stated that if Abel vouched for Kyle's character, then he too would place his absolute faith in him. Once our hero had successfully secured Lord Frantel's trust, the true battle of wits could finally begin. He launched his opening gambit for silver coins per sack, a sharp undercut from the 7 silver coins Frantel had initially put forth. Frantel and his assistant could only stare back at our hero with bewildered expressions, but Kyle pressed his advantage, continuing his verbal assault. He argued that a price of 7 silver for aged wheat was far too steep, especially considering the fact that this old wheat was occupying precious warehouse space, bleeding them of money through storage fees each passing day. He drove his point home, suggesting that a sale at 4 silver was the most strategically sound option for them both. After a tense and masterful exchange of offers and counteroffers, Kyle finally agreed to a final price of 5 silver coins per sack. Once the intense negotiations had concluded and they had retired to their guest quarters to finally rest, Kyle was absolutely ecstatic with his victory. Even Leon Hart was deeply impressed by his master's shrewd negotiation tactics. He asked with genuine curiosity if he had acquired these skills from a book. The question seemed to catch Kyle completely by surprise. He sheepishly replied that the Grand Library held every book one could ever need. But the unspoken truth was far more amusing. He had actually honed these formidable negotiation skills from years of haggling in digital marketplaces in his past life. The knight then questioned how he intended to profit by merely buying grain. Kyle explained his fundamental strategy: acquire grain when it is dirt cheap, and then sell it for a fortune when the demand inevitably skyrockets. The knight countered that the current grain supply across the lands was stable, and their own territory of El Dresden had stockpiles to last until the following year. He added that profiting from this venture would be immensely difficult by just introducing old grain back into a stable market. With a knowing look, Kyle simply stated they were making preparations, because in this world, one can never truly know what the future holds. You see, our protagonist knew exactly what was coming: a great and terrible famine. Shortly after the Saltarian Marquis family succession rites were completed, unfathomable weather anomalies would trigger a cataclysmic drought across the continent. As a result, the price of grain would soar to unbelievable heights. In that desperate time, it wouldn't matter if the grain was fresh or aged. Starving people would be unable to find sustenance, even with mountains of gold. But Kyle kept this terrible foresight locked away, knowing that such a prophecy was impossible to explain to his loyal knight. However, it seemed that that no explanation was needed after all. The knight conceded that every action Kyle had taken up to this point, no matter how strange, had a profound reason, so he would place his faith in him once more. As the knight spoke these words, a system notification flared, and his favorability rating surged to a solid 50, a number that completely boggled Kyle's mind, considering it had been deep in the negatives when they first met. Later that evening, Ursil entered the chambers. She explained that the esteemed Count Frantel Neuron had a matter to discuss with him before the evening meal. She politely asked if Lord Kyle could spare him a brief moment. When Kyle arrived at the Count's private study and knocked gently, he entered, stating he heard the Count wished for an audience. The Count waved him in, assuring him it was nothing too serious. He simply wished to make a personal introduction for Kyle. Our hero asked with genuine curiosity who he was about to meet. It was then that a young, elegant girl stood and introduced herself as Frantel, Neuron's beloved daughter. The instant our hero heard her melodic voice and laid eyes upon her, he was visibly stunned. He recognized her instantly. It was Iris Neuron, and Kyle was clearly not prepared for this fateful encounter. To understand the depths of our hero's shock at her appearance, we must delve into her history. You see, Iris Neuron wasn't just some random side character in the game. She was a true standout, possessing both captivating looks and top-tier magical aptitude. In the world of fantasy defense, she had amassed a massive, dedicated fanbase, especially in the early stages of the game, while everyone was still struggling to level up. But with all these incredible positive traits, there came a crushing, negative side to her character. The fact was, she was unbelievably arrogant and proud. Yes, she possessed breathtaking beauty, but she was also a veritable tyrant in her own right. She reveled in crushing others beneath her heel and despised anyone she deemed weak. She basked in the lavish luxury afforded by her talent, but her personality was a chaotic and destructive storm. Attempting to get on her good side was a fool's errand that would leave you penniless, thanks to her insatiable lust for wealth and luxury. As the game's story progressed, her star began to dim with the emergence of true S and even SSS class magicians. Eventually, she found herself utterly abandoned by her once loyal fans. And now, in this moment, Kyle was frozen, wondering if he should even try to recruit this ticking time bomb to his cause, especially since he had no desire to declare bankruptcy, just to satisfy her whims. He pushed those chaotic thoughts aside for the time being and began to question why Count Neuron was presenting his daughter to him in the first place. At that exact moment, the Count, oblivious, continued his happy introduction. He mentioned that his precious daughter had just turned 11 this very year, so there was barely an age gap, considering Kyle himself was 13. He expressed his sincere hope that the two of them could become dear friends. Then the Count added that she too was diligently studying the art of magic these days. He insisted, not merely as a doting father, but as a matter of fact, that she possessed a truly exceptional magical talent. And since Kyle was also on the path of a mage, the Count imagined they could benefit from each other's knowledge and have a grand time together. My guy was momentarily speechless, at a complete loss for words, especially since, judging by the thunderous expression on her face, it was painfully obvious she had zero interest in making any new friends, regardless of how much her well-meaning father was pushing for it. Eventually, our protagonist offered her a polite greeting, introducing himself as Kyle of the House, Saltarian, the fourth and final son of the mighty Marquis of Saltarian. He was attempting a smooth recovery, saying he looked forward to their future interactions. Even as he spoke these pleasantries, he activated his appraisal ability, swiftly scanning her hidden stats. It came as absolutely no surprise. Her character traits aligned perfectly with the disastrous profile he remembered, and she boasted a whopping negative 48 favorability score towards him. But what truly sent a shockwave through his system was her listed talent, Mana's Companion. You see, Kyle's own talent was Mana Stagnation, a broken, god-tier ability he had never encountered in another soul. And back in the original game, Mana's Companion was the absolute pinnacle of talent in the mage class. It was a gift bestowed upon only the top 0.01% of SSS class mages. So he was utterly baffled as to how Iris, a mere A-class mage in the original fantasy defense, could possess such a legendary, world-breaking talent. It was clear she'd been buffed, just like his brothers, Abel and Ursil. This meant that a universe of new possibilities had opened up for her, and Kyle couldn't help but wonder what this monumental shift meant for their dynamic. He reflected on how, despite her absolutely abrasive personality traits, which made her a character to be avoided at all costs during the game, if he could somehow get his hands on an SSS level talent like hers, the entire game board would change. He simply could not afford to let this golden opportunity slip away, no matter what the cost. On the other side of the room, Iris, dripping with her signature brand of sass, finally decided to fire back. She pointedly noted that he was the fourth, and thus last, in the Saltarian family line, teasing him with the fact that his name was completely unknown to her, even though she was well aware of the grand achievements of Abel and Adolf. Celtarian, and with a condescending smirk, she boasted that she had already ascended to the second circle, while he remained pathetically stuck in the first circle. She mused aloud about what they could possibly do about this massive power gap, acting as if they existed on entirely different planes of existence. Meanwhile, Kyle was putting on the performance of a lifetime to maintain a placid face, but on the inside, a storm of curses was brewing for her. He couldn't help but question the heavens why she had to be this way, wondering, was she truly born with such a twisted and awful character? Even from the time she was a small child? Kyle calmly replied that yes, he was indeed a first circle mage, and it had only been a mere 3 months since he began to study magic. When Iris heard this revelation, her eyes shot wide. She instantly calculated that he had reached the first circle in an impossibly short time. A sliver of shock entered her mind as she realized he was progressing far faster than she ever did. Twice as fast, to be precise. He then calmly explained he only began learning magic after his 13th birthday. Iris, with a hint of her usual sass, reminded him he was quite late to the game, saying that it's common knowledge that one begins their magical training around age 10, at the absolute latest. Kyle responded with a positive nod, agreeing that he had indeed started a bit behind schedule. But in his mind's eye, he was comparing her to a feisty, hissing kitten. Her natural, almost charming aggression made her constant insults almost bearable. He decided to reveal a bit more of his hand, telling her he had suffered from a crippling hermetic illness for years, and had only recently made a miraculous recovery from it. Iris was genuinely, visibly surprised to learn that Kyle had conquered such a deadly affliction. A faint blush crept onto her cheeks as she muttered, "Well, that's actually quite impressive." But she quickly regained her composure, defensively snapping out of it. She insisted that she wasn't admiring him for his feat or anything like that. Her father then interjected, reminding her that overcoming such an illness typically demanded an extraordinary reserve of magical power, or the latent potential to become a legendary great knight. The fact that Kyle had achieved this impossible feat at just 13 years of age was nothing short of remarkable, he explained. He went on, saying Kyle was destined to grow even stronger as he matured. He urged Iris to consider studying alongside him, hoping they might learn from one another, and thus positively influence each other's growth and development. Iris, however, remained adorably, infuriatingly stubborn. She reminded her father that our hero was still just a first circle mage, so she was quite unsure what she could possibly glean from someone in a lower circle than herself. All the while, Kyle stood there, a perfectly placid smile plastered across his face. He mused to himself how her characteristic contempt for the weak was now on full display. She was severely underestimating him, arrogantly assuming he was truly the weaker of the two. He thought to himself how her personality was truly a problematic thing, and he figured it was his duty to help her fix that terrible habit. And with that final thought, he decided that Iris Nairn would be the third person of talent he would recruit to stand by his side, to properly impress her. He told her not to judge a book so carelessly by its cover. He then stepped closer to her, and with an unwavering confidence, declared he would prove he was not weaker than her. And once he did, she would no longer be able to ignore his existence. Iris felt a blush creeping up her neck as she saw Kyle's supreme confidence, and she couldn't help but feel a little flustered by his powerful demeanor. She quickly recovered, asking how he intended to prove his strength. In response, Kyle threw down the gauntlet, challenging her to a magical duel. He declared that if he were to lose, he would gladly admit she was stronger. But before he could even finish his sentence, she cut him off, eagerly insisting she would accept his challenge. She then added with a truly wicked smirk that if she were to win, he would have to kneel before her and lick her feet in submission. Well, I'm not going to lie. That proposition doesn't sound entirely unappealing, does it? Her poor father, however, looked on with an expression of utter shock. He was desperately trying to figure out where she had picked up such a bizarre interest. Iris sheepishly confessed that she had read it in a popular romance novel. Her father immediately began to shout at her, demanding to know what kind of twisted, degenerate novels she was reading. He immediately forbid her from acquiring any more such books, and banned her from ever reading them again in his presence. As Iris's eyes began to well up with tears from her father's scolding, Kyle coolly stepped in, and he assured them both that the specific nature of the wager did not matter. If he lost the duel, he would accept his punishment, even if that punishment meant licking her feet or even her toes. This declaration only served to freak her poor father out even more. But Kyle made it perfectly clear that if he were to be victorious, she would be forced to accept him as her one and only teacher. He also made her swear an oath that she would never again look down on anyone she perceived as weaker or of a lower social stand. Iris paused for a tense moment, but eventually she agreed to his terms. cockily proclaiming that she could never lose to a lowly first circle mage who had only just begun his magical training. With that, she stormed out of the room, brimming with arrogant confidence, while her father sighed, admitting her personality was indeed quite problematic. He explained that it was because she had been raised in a household that had constantly showered her with praise, ever since she was a small child. He confessed his worry that if she continued to grow up this way, she would become increasingly ostracized and hated by the world, making it nearly impossible for her to form bonds with others. As it stood, she had not a single friend of her own age, and it was a sad truth that her reputation in noble circles was less than stellar. Our protagonist was amazed to see that despite being a doting father, the Count was fully aware that his daughter was a deeply problematic child. This realization made him respect the old Count a great deal more, knowing the man was not simply blinded by his love for his daughter. The Count then noted how Kyle himself had endured a stormy and difficult childhood, wondering if that was precisely why he could understand Iris's unique mindset and behavior. He believed it would be incredibly beneficial for her to experience true defeat, at least once in her pampered life. So, he gave our hero his full and explicit permission to not hold anything back, and to teach her the harsh, necessary lessons she so rightly deserved. When Kyle heard this, a wicked smile spread across his face. Now he had her father's blessing to teach her a truly unforgettable lesson, and he was looking forward to it immensely. Meanwhile, Iris was still furiously stomping through the grand hallways, muttering to herself how he couldn't possibly teach her anything of value when he was merely a mage of the first circle. She was feeling incredibly vexed and annoyed. But then her mind flashed back to that recent, electrifying, heart-pounding moment they had just shared, and she couldn't deny the truth. He was an undeniably handsome young man. Still, her ingrained arrogance quickly kicked back in, and she stubbornly reminded herself that he was just a first circle mage. She renewed her determination to make him lick her feet no matter what it took. Oddly enough, despite her venomous internal monologue, her favorability towards Kyle began to steadily creep upwards. I suppose that's just the mysterious way that Sunder characters operate. A short while later, our hero had returned to his private chambers, and Leon Hart pointed out that Count Nyron's seemingly innocent introduction of his daughter likely concealed a much deeper, hidden intention behind it. His master asked him what he could possibly mean by such a statement, and the knight reminded him that although she was only 11 years old, it was a perfectly suitable age for discussing potential marriage proposals. Plus, the age gap between her and our protagonist was hardly significant. This horrific realization sent a cold chill running down Kyle's spine, and he practically yelled at Leon Hart for even suggesting the idea of him getting married to an 11-year-old girl. Leon Hart calmly reminded him that nobles typically wed much earlier than common folk, so it was not at all uncommon for them to become engaged in their early teens. My guy felt like he was about to physically vomit as he finally grasped the terrifying reason why Count Nera was so incredibly eager to introduce his precious daughter to him. Leon Hart even advised him not to be too harsh in tomorrow's duel, suggesting that they could never know what the future might hold for the relationship between the two of them in the coming years. He added that while Lady Iris may be a tad bit arrogant, she was at the end of the day still just a young lady. Kyle, a devilish grin spreading across his face, then declared that if Iris's father was truly trying to arrange a marriage, then he had no choice but to crush her even more thoroughly in their duel. He made it abundantly, crystal clear that with her kind of toxic attitude, there was absolutely no way he would ever marry her. Absolutely not. He refused. Period. Full stop. Instead, he resolved to use every ounce of his strength to fix her twisted, awful personality. Suddenly, Ursil's ears perked up at the mention of marriage and proposals, and judging by the subtle expression on her face, it was painfully obvious she did not want to see Kyle marry Lady Iris. The fateful day finally arrived, and the rules for the grand duel were laid out. It would be a single-round, winner-take-all match. The combatants would use magic to subdue their opponent without inflicting any serious harm. Leon Hart added that if things became too dangerous, he would not hesitate to intervene and halt the match. He then asked both combatants if they agreed to these established rules. Kyle then got sassy, pointedly reminding Iris that since his personal knight would be serving as the referee, did she perhaps have any objections to raise? The girl maintained her usual, infuriatingly nonchalant attitude. She simply replied that she had no problem with the arrangement at all. Iris explained that Sir Leon Hart was a renowned and high-level expert knight, well known throughout the lands of Enfile, so she knew for a fact he would not deliver a biased judgment. With that, Leon Hart finally declared the duel would begin. Iris struck a dramatic pose and instantly unleashed a blazing torrent of fire towards him. Kyle just met her assault with a calm, knowing smile. He was impressed by the incredible speed of her incantations. It was hard to believe she was a mere 11 years old with such refined skills, but he knew she was still leagues and leagues behind him. And he swiftly countered her spell with a slicing gale of his own wind magic. Their powers clashed in a violent explosion, and his wind effortlessly extinguished her fire arrow. Iris grit her teeth, her face a mask of pure frustration. But she quickly swung her magical staff once more, preparing another attack. She thought to herself that she hadn't even begun to unleash her true, full strength, and she refused to lose to a lowly first circle mage like him. She launched another, more powerful fire arrow, this one burning with an even greater intensity. But Kyle neutralized it with a casual flick of his magical wand. He couldn't help but appreciate her fiery, indomitable personality. She clearly did not know the meaning of the word surrender. Her innate magical power was truly impressive for someone of her age, but he was still determined to teach her a harsh and necessary lesson. Kyle raised his hand and unleashed a crackling bolt of lightning, a spell commonly known as the magic missile, a spell that brilliantly combined both his lightning and his formidable wind powers. Count Neron watched on in utter shock and disbelief, realizing that his potential future son-in-law could flawlessly perform double cast, a highly refined and difficult magical technique that was almost unheard of for a mere first circle magician to master. Iris saw the devastating lightning attack streaking directly towards her, and she hastily erected a magical shield to desperately block it. But her flimsy shield was dispersed almost instantaneously upon impact, and before she could even process what had happened, Ka was standing right before her, his wand pointed directly at her throat. Leon Hart calmly declared, "Our hero the victor of the duel." And as my guy swaggered away with a deeply satisfied smile on his face, he couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of triumph. But this arrogant, prideful girl, on the other hand, was struggling to accept the humiliating fact that she had just lost to a first circle magician. To salvage what little remained of her pride, she claimed it was just pure dumb luck that he had won, because she had just been in a poor physical condition for a brief moment. And so she stubbornly demanded an immediate rematch to prove her point. Kyle readily agreed to the proposed rematch, but he made it perfectly clear that the outcome would not be any different, no matter what she did. And so, after a short while, they faced off once more, and this time, Iris was defeated yet again, falling to her knees in complete and utter exhaustion. This was now the 5th consecutive round that she had lost, and honestly, that feels incredibly brutal for someone as arrogant as she is. He gently informed her that no matter how many times she tried to challenge him, the results would always remain the same. He advised her to just end their duel here and now, since she had probably exhausted her magical power by this point. As the cold, hard reality finally sank into her mind, Iris began to feel the crushing heat of her utter defeat, and she finally broke down, crying like a small child. Count Neron grew anxious and deeply worried for his daughter. It wasn't surprising, really. Despite her overwhelming arrogance, she was still just a child, after all. Even Kyle began to feel a slight pang of guilt for his actions, thinking about how he had just made a young girl cry. He hadn't wanted it to come to this tragic end, but he knew that it was a necessary and painful lesson for her to learn. That night, inside the Grand Count Neron's mansion, Kyle found himself staring blankly at the fancy, formal clothes the Count had so graciously provided for the evening's banquet. It seemed he wasn't exactly feeling the whole dressing up vibe at the moment. Leon Hart, his loyal knight, chimed in, reminding him that even though it was a small, intimate family gathering, it was still a formal occasion, and it was best to dress appropriately. But Kyle was unsure why they had even bothered to invite him to this banquet. After all, he had literally made their precious daughter cry just hours before. Leon Hart replied that Count Neron had explicitly said it was perfectly fine to teach her some harsh but necessary lessons. Besides, he had probably anticipated that something like this would happen. Leon Hart then pointed out something even more terrifying. Since our hero had fairly and decisively defeated Lady Iris in their duel, Count Neron now seemed even more determined to make him his son-in-law. Kyle let out a weary sigh, saying that Iris would probably hate him even more. Now, but his knight insisted that was not the case at all. Judging by her complex expression during the duel, it was highly likely that Lady Iris had actually taken a liking to him. Our hero found this notion utterly bizarre, asking if that could really be true. Leon Hart simply told him to focus on preparing himself for the upcoming banquet, while Ursil swiftly began to help him get dressed for the occasion. As Leon Hart observed them from the background, he couldn't help but inwardly lament how Lord Kyle seemed to possess all the knowledge in the world, but was surprisingly, hopelessly clueless when it came to matters of the heart. Once Ursil had finished adjusting his hair to perfection, she stepped back and proudly announced that he was ready. When we take a full look, my guy absolutely looks like a bona fide lady killer. Both the loyal knight and the devoted maid perked up, clearly impressed by how devastatingly handsome he looked. With that matter finally settled, Kyle decided it was time to head out, since they were all now ready for the grand event. After preparing for the banquet, Kyle finally made his grand entrance into the main mansion's hall, where he was warmly greeted by other noble guests of similar age. A young man with brown hair introduced himself as Myers, while the one with striking purple hair stated that he was the second son of the noble Neron family. It looks like Mr. It seems to be inevitable. Meanwhile, Count Neron was frantically scanning the entire area, clearly on a desperate lookout for his missing daughter. He wasn't sure why she was running so terribly late. He even instructed one of the servants to go and check on Lady Iris. Kyle overheard this exchange and began to wonder if she might be upset because of him and was avoiding the banquet because he had made her cry. Eventually, one of the maids gracefully escorted Lady Iris into the grand hall, and she immediately called out to her father, announcing that she had finally arrived. Despite her young age, she exuded a surprisingly mature and elegant vibe. She looked more refined than simply cute, but she quickly became flustered, just as any young lady would. When she spotted Kyle, who was also looking every bit the dashing lady killer, she hesitantly approached him. And Kyle immediately began thinking about how he had fully expected her to be crying and sulking in her room. But contrary to what he had thought, here she was, which was quite surprising given her volatile nature. Meanwhile, Iris's head was swirling with a storm of her own thoughts. She hadn't expected him to look this devastatingly handsome. I mean, she knew he was good looking, of course, but the riz and aura he was emitting was just on another level, especially in the fine clothes he was currently wearing. Finally, the Count instructed everyone to take their seats and begin the grand dinner. The Count also made absolutely sure that Kyle was seated right next to his future wife. However, Kyle did not seem too thrilled about this seating arrangement because he was still worried that she might start crying or get angry that he was sitting right next to her. He quickly activated his mind's eye ability once more and noticed that her personality characteristics hadn't changed all that much. Despite this, it looked like her favorability towards him had somehow increased by a whopping 30 points. It had gone from a -40 all the way up to a -10. This completely shocked Kyle, because after everything that had transpired and how she had just faced such a humiliating and utter defeat, he had fully expected her favorability score to drop even further into the abyss, not rise so dramatically. But then again, he wondered if this was due to the appearance worship characteristic that she possessed. There was a good chance she now viewed him as nothing more than a pretty decorative item. Anyway, Kyle proceeded to enjoy a delicious dinner. The atmosphere during the meal was much warmer than he had anticipated, and Iris was surprisingly quiet, behaving quite normally in front of her family, without her usual arrogant act. While picking up the salt shaker from the center of the table, they both also accidentally brushed their hands against each other, while Kyle was merely trying to help her by offering her some salt. And that simple, unexpected touch completely flustered the young lady. After that, the girl quickly turned her head away in embarrassment, avoiding any eye contact. All the while, Kyle was probably just wondering whether she actually wanted the salt or not. He decided to place it back on the table, but closer to her, and she promptly and quietly thanked him for his kind gesture. Kyle was still not entirely sure what was going on, or why she was acting so strangely. Even though her favorability score had indeed gone up, her attitude towards him had also become significantly weirder. I guess Kyle is actually pretty oblivious when it comes to romance. After all, I mean, who can really blame him? He used to be a total coomer who did nothing in his previous life except play video games all day. The next day finally arrived, and the very first thing we see is a completely clueless look on Kyle's face. Apparently, Lady Iris was sitting right in front of him in his receiving room, and he certainly wasn't expecting her to come and see him personally, just to have a meeting with him. After a graceful sip of her tea, she reminded him that she was here to keep the promise she had made. Now that she had lost their duel, he would become her new teacher, so she requested that he explain why his magic was so incredibly strong. She explained that his magical method was a bit different from the usual conventions, and she had never seen anything even remotely like it in any magic book she had read. She was absolutely desperate to know who had taught him. She proceeded to bombard him with a ton of rapid-fire questions, like whether he had developed these unique powers by some random chance, and how he was able to perform double casting so effortlessly. She was so incredibly excited to learn everything he knew that she literally shot up from her seat in the heat of the moment, and politely, yet enthusiastically, demanded that he share everything that he knew with her. Kyle felt completely overwhelmed by her barrage of questions, and asked her to give him a brief minute to process everything, by first issuing a stern decree. If she truly desired to become his disciple and wield his unique magic, then she must first learn to tame her own unruly spirit. At first, the meaning behind his words completely eluded Iris's comprehension. So Kyle spelled it out, leaving no room for doubt. She must treat others with courtesy and banish her unreasonable demands. Furthermore, she must contemplate 3 times before allowing rage to consume her. But it seemed this monumental task was simply too much for her to bear. A fire of protest ignited, and she demanded to know why she must bow to these rules, when not even her own father would dare to impose such shackles upon her. But Kyle's will was absolute. If she could not reform her flawed attitude, then he would not bestow upon her the secrets of his magic. The young lady desperately tried to argue her case, proclaiming that his conditions were far too tyrannical. But Kyle reminded her of a crushing reality. He was the sole master of this power, a special method that he alone had forged and perfected. He then revealed his ultimate trump card. He had created mixed drive magic, a revolutionary art that had never been documented anywhere in the world. Therefore, she could never learn this power from anyone else but him. He even gave her a brief but breathtaking demonstration of its might, confident that as a fellow practitioner of the arcane arts, she would undoubtedly grasp the profound significance of his skills. Of course, the sharp young prodigy instantly acknowledged the truth. She conceded his point was valid, but still felt a deep unease in her heart, as much as her pride screamed against it. She reluctantly, and with great annoyance, accepted his harsh conditions. In the end, a knowing smirk played on Kyle's lips. He could see right through the innocent facade she was desperately trying to maintain. She could not deceive him so easily. To ensure she would uphold her end of the bargain, he revealed that he had already made certain preparations in advance. The girl was stunned once more, demanding to know what he was talking about. But the answer soon materialized before her very eyes. A magical contract scroll. He dispelled any lingering hope she had by reminding her that, if she truly wished to become his cherished disciple, then all she had to do was accept these conditions and sign the binding contract. And as she knew all too well, to break a magically signed contract would invoke an absolute penalty, a divine judgment imposed by the ancient, unforgiving gods themselves. So he warned her to take this oath with the utmost seriousness. Furthermore, no magic known to man could ever nullify such a contract. She cried out, asking why he would resort to such extreme measures to bind her. She wondered if it was because he harbored a deep distrust for her. To this, Kyle did not hesitate, admitting with a cold honesty that yes, he did not, in fact, entirely trust her. You see, Kyle was thoroughly convinced that if her deep-seated attitude problem could be cured with mere words, it wouldn't still be a glaring issue after 11 long years of her life. It was a flaw that was incredibly tough to change, and he would not have gone through all this immense trouble if it were something that could be so easily fixed. He then told her that this very magical contract had been originally bestowed upon him after their fateful duel just the day before. Her own father had come to Kyle, pleading with him to guide his daughter well. After witnessing Kyle's overwhelming skill firsthand, he was absolutely certain that only our hero could finally get through to her. The doting father, with tears nearly in his eyes, had even confessed that if Iris refused to heed his words, Kyle had his full permission to use this very magic contract on her, one of the only 2 genuine and ancient contracts left in their family's treasury. And now, back in the present, Iris felt a whirlwind of embarrassment and utter confusion. Realizing her own father was the mastermind who had roped her into this, she was convinced her father would never say such a thing. So she declared that Kyle had better not be weaving a web of lies. Absolutely determined to uncover the truth, she began to storm out, intending to confront her father personally. Kyle just sat there calmly as she began to march away. But then he let out a long, weary sigh. He called out, commanding her to halt in her tracks. He added that if she were to turn back now, their burgeoning contract would become null and utterly void. And if that were to happen, he would be unable to see her ever again, let alone teach her a single shred of his powerful magic. This shocking news caught the eavesdropping Ursil completely off guard. Kyle, however, remained unyielding, telling her that she must decide here and now. He asked if she would sign the contract and learn his legendary magic, or if she would refuse and banish herself from this room for good. He made it painfully clear that if she chose the latter path, their fates would never again intertwine. He posed the question one final time: did she desire this power? After which, they would never lay eyes on each other again. An inward smile spread across Kyle's face. He believed this might be the very last day of her childish tantrums, and her insufferable, prideful attitude and he was genuinely looking forward to witnessing her transformation. He knew that while Iris possessed a legendary SSS class talent, if her toxic character continued to cause endless trouble, he would have no other choice but to completely abandon her. For his grand ambitions, he needed trustworthy allies and loyal subordinates. Not a ticking time bomb he had to constantly appease in every situation. Iris, on the other hand, finally summoned the courage to speak her mind. After taking the enchanted pen into her hand, she stubbornly declared that if she proclaimed she would do something, then she would see it through to the very end. With that, she at last began to read the terms of the contract, albeit with a great deal of reluctance. Kyle simply offered her a smile and advised her to make sure she read every single term carefully before affixing her signature. In the contract, Party A was designated as Kyle, while Party B represented Iris. As we gaze upon the contracts page, it is no wonder she was feeling so hesitant to sign. The tyrannical terms went far beyond what she could possibly tolerate, and if she dared to break any of the outlined rules, she would face the humiliating penalty of a severe stomachache. The young lady asked if such stomach pains were truly necessary, to which Kyle just smiled and calmly replied, "A little stomachache won't be so terribly bad." Even Iris seemed a little bit surprised by this revelation. She had expected the penalty to be something far more dangerous, but this was actually something she believed she could manage. So she eventually agreed to the terms, a seed of rebellion in her mind. She figured that since the pain wouldn't be truly severe, she wouldn't have to worry too much about following everything to the letter. But then something suddenly struck her as she read further, and she noticed that the penalty for the dreaded Rule 7 was incredibly strict. It decreed that her very magic circle would be terminated if she did not obey. She asked if this meant she would be forced to join him in battle, and Kyle confirmed it without a single moment of hesitation, reminding her that if she was truly afraid of the fight, then there was absolutely no need for her to learn stronger magic. He posed a critical question, asking why she truly desired to learn magic. She fell silent for a tense moment, then admitted her true desire to be superior to all others, because she reveled in the act of beating and subduing them. She wanted the entire world to look up to her in awe and admiration, and she had always loved being the absolute center of attention. That was the very reason she began to study magic in the first place. But she confessed that lately, learning magic had become fun for its own sake. She had started to truly enjoy discovering new things and improving her own skills, so much so that studying all through the night no longer felt like a hardship. Kyle was completely blown away by her heartfelt perspective, and a genuine, proud smirk spread across his handsome face as he witnessed the extraordinary desire to win and to improve, shining brightly in her eyes. He was now genuinely looking forward to seeing her magnificent transformation. You see, the greatest aptitude for becoming a powerful mage doesn't rely on the sheer amount of magical power one is born with, but rather on one's insatiable intellectual curiosity, an unquenchable eagerness to learn the secrets of magic, and a burning desire for more and more power. Without these core qualities, she would never become truly strong. These are the very traits that accompany the blessing of mana. She desired stronger magic and craved even greater power. And with that newfound resolve, she finally signed the sacred contract. Both the ancient contract and the enchanted pen magically floated into the air and flew directly towards Kyle. He then extended his hand for a formal handshake, stating he looked forward to working with her in the near future, hoping that Iris would one day become a strong and loyal companion of his. For a split second, she remained completely silent, but when the true weight of his words finally sank in, she became utterly embarrassed at the prospect of being his companion. She freaked out so spectacularly that her long, elegant ponytails nearly came undone. Kyle quickly tried to clear up the misunderstanding by reminding her that he didn't mean companions in that romantic sense, but simply as a valuable member of his team. However, Iris snapped back that he should have chosen his words more carefully. Now that their business was concluded, she abruptly stormed out of the room, and it appears this hopelessly clueless guy still had no idea why she had reacted that way. Even his loyal knight, standing behind him, understood the situation, thinking to himself that Kyle could stand to be a bit more careful with his words, especially when he possessed a face as devastatingly handsome as his. And then there was the ever-watchful Ursil, who did not look too pleased about this new competition in the game of unrequited love. Later that same night, Ursil bluntly asked Kyle if he was planning to one day marry Lady Iris. Of course, this completely unexpected question nearly made him choke, and he exclaimed, asking what in the world she was talking about. He reminded her that Iris was only 11, and he himself was just a mere 13. They were nowhere near the appropriate age to even consider marriage. It seems that Kyle still had absolutely no clue why Ursil would ask him such a question, and he just wondered why everyone around him was so eager to see him married off so young. Ursil then pressed further, asking if he was really not considering, to which he firmly replied that he was not. Besides, he had far too many monumental tasks to accomplish right now. Meanwhile, in the back of his strategic mind, he was thinking about how the entire world could end at any moment, and he simply had no time for frivolous things like dating or marriage. So he simply told this inquisitive young girl that he would consider marriage and other such matters after he had reached at least the age of 18. Ursil acknowledged his answer, then casually mentioned that her own mother was a remarkably beautiful woman, so she was confident that she, too, would grow up to be just as beautiful. With that cryptic statement, she dashed off, wishing him a good night. Kyle, who was left behind, felt both incredibly embarrassed and completely flustered, wondering why on earth she would even bring up something like that. Kyle mused that the children in this era seemed to be a bit more mature. Even young Ursil seemed to be concerned with marriage already. He felt a flush of heat as he considered that she was already quite pretty, but she would undoubtedly blossom into an even more beautiful woman as she grew. Then a piece of her history came back to him. Ursil had hailed from the noble Halayam Baron family, but after her family's name fell into ruin and disgrace, they were stripped of their noble status entirely, and she herself was tragically sold into slavery. Her father and her brothers were all dead, but her mother and sister were supposedly still alive somewhere in the world. However, he had no knowledge of their current whereabouts. He figured that Ursil must be deeply curious about her lost family, but she had never once brought the subject up, which made him wonder if she simply didn't want to know where they were, or if the topic was just far too painful for her to speak about. Whatever the case may be, he was now determined to find out what was going on. A few days later, Kyle and his party took their carriage back to their home mansion. As it finally rolled away, Kyle waved his final goodbyes to the esteemed Count Naren and his family. Iris felt a sharp pang of sadness in her heart, and she wondered why Kyle had to depart so urgently. He could have easily stayed for a few more days, after all. Seeing her crestfallen expression, the Count couldn't help but notice just how much his daughter had seemingly grown to like Kyle. He tried his best to cheer her up, telling her not to be so upset, since Kyle would be returning next month to begin her magic lessons. Annoyed and deeply embarrassed by her father's knowing comment, Iris insisted that she didn't like Kyle at all. She just found him to be incredibly annoying. She even tried to act nonchalant, saying that when he returned the next month, she wouldn't even bother to open the door for him. But right at that precise moment, she felt a sharp, stabbing ache in her stomach that made her double over and collapse to the ground in agonizing pain. The Count instantly remembered Kyle's words about how Iris must think 3 times before succumbing to her anger. Otherwise, her stomach would surely hurt. This made him believe that the stomachache she was currently feeling must be the direct result of the magic contract's penalty. He quickly urged her not to be angry, and to think 3 times before she said anything so irrational again. If she could only hold back her fiery anger, her stomach would surely stop hurting. But of course, how could she not be angry? She couldn't help but tear up as she called Kyle an absolute jerk. She was so loud that even Kyle could faintly hear her from his moving carriage, and he couldn't help but think that someone was cursing his name from afar. After that truly memorable stay at the Count Naron's grand mansion, Kyle and his companions finally returned to their home in Enfile. The very first thing we see is Kyle's utterly bewildered expression. He looks completely shocked because his brother, the great Abel, has apparently purchased a massive amount of grain from Enfile for some completely unknown reason. Kyle is certain that he never mentioned a single word about the impending famine to his brother, so he cannot possibly understand why Abel would suddenly buy so much grain. Abel simply explains that after listening to his little brother's plans, he just had a powerful and undeniable gut feeling about it, and so he decided to purchase some for himself as well. When Kyle asked precisely how much he had bought, Abel casually gestures with his fingers, though it's hard to make out exactly what the prodigy is trying to say, since the scene is intentionally blurred for dramatic effect. But whatever the staggering amount might be, it is more than enough to shock Kyle to his very core. He is absolutely stunned to learn that his brother has purchased 100 times more grain than he did. Abel just says he had a feeling that the more he bought, the better the outcome would be. He further reassures Kyle that, even if he ends up suffering a catastrophic loss on this grain investment, he would never blame his precious little brother, since the decision to acquire all that grain was entirely and solely his own. Kyle acknowledges this with a nod and confirms that he's not really concerned about that possibility. In fact, he can't shake the intrusive thought of how Abel is about to rake in an absolutely insane amount of profit. Out of sheer curiosity, Kyle tells his brother that he is certain Abel could win any prize just by purchasing a single lottery ticket one time, to which Abel coolly replies that he has never once considered buying a lottery ticket because such a thing does not suit a person of his noble status. Of course, he's never tried it since he is already astronomically wealthy. Kyle feels a pang of jealousy as he admires the incredible foresight and luck his brother seems to possess. The scene then dramatically transitions to the castle's training grounds, where we witness someone swinging a massive sword like a total beast. This formidable sword wielder is none other than Kyle's own father, the Marquis, whose name I believe I have now forgotten. Kyle then arrives on the scene, looking as though he has been formally summoned by his powerful father. His father asks if his journey to the lands of Enfilum went well, to which Kyle politely replies that he is grateful to Count Neyron for treating him with such hospitality, and that he had an exceptionally comfortable stay. While wiping the sweat from his powerful brow, his father states that he has just received a letter from Count Neyron, where he learned that Kyle had promised to teach the young lady Iris magic. Kyle acknowledges this fact, and adds that it sort of just happened by fate. He then explains that the daughter of that noble house is quite a unique and talented young lady. His father believes this could be a truly good experience for him, and so he encourages Kyle to try his absolute best in teaching her. However, Kyle begins to imagine Iris's insufferably arrogant personality and isn't so sure he can actually have a good experience with her. Kyle then further asks his father if the Count mentioned anything else besides the topic of her magic lessons. His father pauses in thought for a moment, then recalls that Count Neyron did indeed bring up the subject of Lady Iris and a potential engagement between them. However, he quickly reassures Kyle that it is not the Celtarian family tradition to become engaged so early in life, especially when neither of his elder sons have yet been engaged. This news comes as an immense relief to Kyle, who has been desperately trying to avoid this topic for quite some time. He wholeheartedly agrees with his father, stating that there is still so much more he has left to learn. He then further reminds his father that he must make up for all the time he has lost due to his crippling past illness. So he hopes that his father can persuade the Count to hold off on any engagement plans for the time being. His father agrees, and Kyle thanks him with sincere gratitude. Kyle lets out a massive sigh of relief, elated to realize there will be no more talk of engagement after this. But his father calls out to him once more, reminding him that he has absolutely no intention of forcing him into a political marriage. Kyle is deeply puzzled by this statement and asks for clarification. His father then explains that he himself was never officially married to Kyle's mother, and this was not due to her lowly status, but rather because she never had any intention of marrying him. She went along with their relationship and bore him children, but never formalized their sacred marriage vows. Kyle's father had tried to ask her about her reasons, and he had reassured her that he did not care about her social status. He emphasized that there would be absolutely no issue, since she was about to give birth to the rightful successor of the great Celtarian family. He mentioned that even his most loyal subordinates had fully supported his decision to marry her. However, Kyle's mother informed him that she had been the late Marchioness's handmaid, and she wished to apologize to the memory of the former Marchioness. She expressed that she didn't believe she could ever face the two young masters who had so recently lost their beloved mother. It seems the Marchioness was the former, now deceased wife of Kyle's father, and that Abel and Adolf were her biological children. This finally explains why Kyle has stark white hair, while his elder half-brothers both possess golden blonde hair. The Marquis then tells his son that he truly loved his mother, which is the very reason why he was born. He advises Kyle that when choosing a spouse, he might consider the family's potential benefits, but he doesn't necessarily need to worry about any differences in their status. His father promises to support him in any case, no matter what. He assures his son that he truly means it. Whatever decision Kyle ultimately makes, he will be there by his side to support him. This entire heartfelt speech leaves Kyle utterly speechless, as it was a completely unexpected confession from the stoic Marquis. He briefly wonders if the Marquis actually possesses a doting father's heart, after all, and if he feels some sort of deep sympathy for him. However, he quickly dismisses the thought this can't be true, because the youngest child in a noble house is usually never considered a viable candidate for the family succession, due to their inherent lack of political influence. If the youngest child were to marry the daughter of a powerful family, and thereby gain tremendous influence, there's a high probability of a bloody conflict arising over the succession. And until the entire succession structure is completely stabilized, Kyle wants to avoid getting drawn into any more trouble. And now, he understands that this is what his father is truly concerned about. Kyle finally agrees with his father's wisdom, and tries to brush the topic off by saying that, since he is so young, he doesn't know much about these complicated matters. For now, it is most important for him to remain as the harmless youngest child. By the way, I have finally remembered that our hero's father's name is Remtun. Anyhow, Kyle asks if he has permission to take his leave, since they have now discussed everything he came here for, and he must now go and study in the Grand Library. When Remtun gives Kyle his permission to depart, our hero begins to stride out of the training grounds promptly as Remtun watches his youngest son leave. He reflects on how swiftly his son had changed the subject the moment his mother was mentioned. What bothers him even more is that Kyle doesn't even call him father. He pulls out an old, worn pendant, and as we take a closer look, we see a faded photograph of Kyle's mother, the beautiful Aisha, gazing at her haunting image. Remtun wonders if she, too, had harbored a deep resentment towards him. Meanwhile, as Kyle walks through the silent, grand corridor, he replays his father's supportive words over and over in his mind. For just a brief, fleeting moment, he considers the possibility that Remtun might actually genuinely care about it. But just as he is pondering this very thought, he snaps back to reality, suddenly remembering something important. He had completely forgotten to tell his father about the loot he acquired from the dungeon. He had completely overlooked it because of the heavy topic his father had brought up. Kyle wonders if he should turn back and share everything now. But the very thought of talking to his father again leaves him feeling hesitant. He had instructed Leon Hart not to inform the Marquis about their dungeon conquest until Kyle had reported it himself. And now, our hero is curious to see if Leon Hart will honor his word, or if he will prioritize his unwavering loyalty to the Marquis. Still uncertain about whether he should report to his father, or simply handle this important matter on his own, his mind is conflicted between heading to the sanctuary of the library, or discussing the spoils from the dungeon. As he wrestles with these conflicting thoughts, he unexpectedly bumps directly into someone. The man Kyle collided with quickly apologizes for his carelessness. But as this newcomer takes a closer look at him, he realizes with a start that it is Kyle. It doesn't take long for our hero to recognize that the person standing before him is none other than Duke Seltarian, the third and often troublesome son of the family. Kyle finds it amusing that just as the heavy topic of their mother comes up, he would coincidentally run into his volatile third brother. He can't help but notice how much taller the third son has become since the very last time that they had met. Even though Duke is only 2 years older than Kyle, he is still in much better physical shape. Kyle figures it must be due to the rigorous nightly training he's received from a very young age. He's heard rumors that the third son became a junior officer not too long ago. The arrogant big bro Duke then promptly demands to know why Kyle is here, given the fact that their father had explicitly instructed him to never approach the main building again. Kyle coolly explains that he was released from his detention by their father's own personal decision, after he had recognized his recent achievements in serving the citizens. Duke is clearly unsure of what that could possibly mean, so he bluntly asks Kyle what scheme he's planning to cook up next, and what kind of new trouble he's trying to stir up by pretending to be so mature this time around. Well, there he goes again. This guy really seems like a big, dumb bully bro. To understand why the third son seems to harbor such hostility toward Kyle, we learn that the Duke deeply resented his little brother. Kyle, who was 2 years his junior, had always caused their shared mother, the beautiful Aisha, constant and unbearable worry. Her own health had declined from the immense stress of fearing that Kyle might die young. One fateful day, while the Duke was grappling with his guilt over their mother's cold stillness, Kyle had stormed in and casually asked why their mother was being so quiet. That was the moment the third son broke the terrible news to him that their beloved mother had finally passed away. Kyle, who had been spoiled and terribly insensitive back in those days, had just let out a small chuckle in response, remarking that he had never thought she would actually die before him. This callous remark infuriated the grieving third son, who lashed out, pinning Kyle violently against the wall and yelling at him for speaking so carelessly about the one person who had cared for him for so many long years. The Duke unjustly blamed Kyle for their mother's tragic death, but Kyle grew angry and jerked his brother's hands away in order to break free. He made it clear that if their mother had truly died because of him, then whose fault was it that he could die at any given moment? He believed it was, in some ways, his mother's own fault for bringing him into this world with such a frail and cursed body. The Duke's patience finally snapped, and he punched Kyle hard across the face, sending him crashing violently to the unforgiving ground. He screamed that Kyle was worse than a wild animal, and said that he had only held back his rage all this time, out of respect for their deceased mother. But he would not allow Kyle to cross any more lines from this day forward, and with that, he decided to walk away, after coldly stating that he no longer had any younger siblings. Back in the present moment, Kyle finally understands the deep-seated reason why the Duke hates him so much, and he is certain that this kind of bitter conflict will not be easily resolved. The Duke continues his venomous taunts, calling Kyle out for his act of pretending to be mature. He tells him to just get lost from his sight, and to never return to the main building ever again, even though Kyle now understands the reasons behind his brother's simmering hostility. He is not about to act like a simple punching bag for his insults. So he fires back at his big brother by saying that, since the head of their very household has officially released him from his long confinement and has allowed him to freely enter the main building, what the Duke is currently demanding is basically a direct challenge to the authority of the household's head. To drive his sharp point home, Kyle pointedly asks if the Duke's personal orders are now more important than those of the head of their entire household. This clever remark not only silences the Duke for a moment, but it also annoys him to absolutely no end. He furiously balls up his fist in pure frustration, ready to strike Kyle, but his violent attempt fails when the great Adolf suddenly appears and grabs the Duke's hand in midair. Before his fist can connect with Kyle's handsome face, Kyle is completely shocked to see Adolf here because he didn't even notice him approaching. Meanwhile, the Duke looks completely and utterly bewildered at his eldest brother's sudden and timely appearance. Adolf calmly tells the Duke that striking young people is not at all fitting for someone of his stature, especially not within the main building, where their father is present. The third son's eyes immediately well up with fear, and he doesn't waste a single second before offering an apology. But Adolf calmly tells him to apologize to Kyle, and not to him. Unsurprisingly, the prideful Duke refuses to apologize to Kyle. After offering another half-hearted apology to his big brother, he decides to beat a hasty retreat, leaving Kyle behind in a stunned silence, completely confused about what just happened. Adolf reflects on just how stubborn the Duke truly is and wonders who he could possibly take after being so that way. Meanwhile, Kyle can't help but shoot dubious and suspicious looks at Adolf for so conveniently popping up out of thin air. This makes him wonder if Adolf had been watching them from afar all along. Anyhow, Adolf asks Kyle if he has been hurt anywhere and assures him that the Duke doesn't usually behave in such a manner. Kyle acknowledges this with a nod and admits that he has made a great number of mistakes in his past, so it is perfectly understandable that the Duke does not yet believe in him. That is when Adolf places a heavy hand on Kyle's tiny shoulder and leans in much closer to whisper into his ear that he, for one, trusts his little brother. Kyle thanks his big bro for his kind words outwardly, but inwardly, this is precisely what he had wanted to hear. Adolf then reveals that the Duke has been learning swordsmanship from him lately, but no matter how much the Duke tirelessly trains, his skills simply do not seem to improve. It's as if he's already reached his limit due to his average talent in aura manipulation. With that said, Adolf reminds Kyle that he is a powerful mage who has miraculously overcome his Hermamu disability and is now on a completely different level than the average, unremarkable Duke. The very fact that Adolf is saying all of this shows that he now finds Kyle far more interesting and wants to teach him swordsmanship instead of the talentless Duke. He suggests that since the Duke and Kyle do not get along very well, he can teach the two of them separately. Kyle is surprised to hear that the Duke is learning the art of the sword from Adolf's true intention was to set him on a collision course with the Duke, but our hero saw the venomous trap for what it was, and so Kyle met the provocation with a dismissive laugh. He played the part of the humble novice, declaring he was still a mere first circle mage, with a long and arduous path of learning still stretched before him. For now, the sanctuary of the Grand Library called to him, and with that final excuse, he made his swift and calculated exit. But a chilling question echoed in his mind. Why would a predator like Adolf train the mediocre Duke? You see, our hero knew the truth. Adolf, the master of manipulation, was never one for genuine brotherly affection. There was no logical reason for him to go to such lengths, just to orchestrate a petty squabble. In the original timeline of fantasy defense, the Duke never survived past the rebellion, regardless of the route taken. And was it truly a coincidence that Adolf was the one who delivered the final blow? In every single one of those timelines, the odds were astronomically against. This led Kyle to a terrifying conclusion. The Duke must be hiding a vital secret that he was not yet aware of. The scene then melts away into the beautiful, sun-drenched countryside, a tranquil paradise where any sane soul would wish to live out their days. There we find the loyal knight Leon Hart, dressed in simple, common clothes, carrying a carefully wrapped parcel with him. To understand what he's doing so far from the protection of the mansion, the scene rewinds, flashing back to a pivotal conversation with the Marquis, Remton. He reveals to his commander that young Lord Kyle performed admirably in infiling. Remton acknowledges this, reflecting on how this verbal report perfectly matches the contents of Count Neron's recent letter. He then probes Leon Hart further, asking if anything else of interest transpired during their journey, or during their return trip to the Grand Mansion. The stoic knight falls silent for a tense moment. He hesitates to respond, his mind flashing back to the oath he swore to Kyle, a promise to keep the existence of the dungeon and its treasures a guarded secret. And so, he makes his choice, responding accordingly. He reports that there was nothing else of note to mention. They had only encountered a few low-level, pathetic monsters, but none of them posed any significant threat to their party. The head of the family smiles warmly upon hearing this, and he instructs the knight to continue taking good care of Kyle. He feels a deep sense of relief knowing that someone as capable as Leon Hart is now standing faithfully by Kyle's side. Back in the present, Leon Hart reflects on how he ultimately prioritized Kyle's command over the will of his own sworn master. We also learn he is here to meet his father. At that very moment, a man's voice calls out to him, and when the noble Leon Hart looks up, he spots his aged father standing before him. Once the two of them have settled down to catch up, his father asks how long he will be on vacation this time around, to which Leon Hart solemnly replies he will be free for merely half a day. His father is not particularly thrilled to hear this news, since an eternity seems to have passed since they last spent time together. Leon Hart replies that he will return whenever he has a moment to spare. His father then mentions a curious rumor that the little young master, Kyle, has suddenly matured a great deal in recent days. This completely unexpected question startles Leon Hart at first, but he quickly recovers and agrees with his father, stating that Lord Kyle has indeed become much more dignified as of late. He then further confesses that he never expected to find himself escorting Kyle for this long. Initially, his grand plan, after escorting the young lord just one time, was to return to the prestigious knights of the Saltarian and continue his work. His father looks at him, able to read the conflict warring on his face, so he gently tries to get him to open up. He asks his son if his convictions have perhaps changed since then. To this, Leonard admits he is no longer certain what path he wants to take. His mind then drifts back to the moment when Lord Kyle decided to gift him with a magnificent new sword. Kyle had told him that the blade he previously wielded was far too weak to contain the aura of an upper-level expert knight. If he were to pour his full power into it, the sword would surely shatter. And so, he had always been forced to suppress his true aura to some extent. Leon Hart had asked how he could possibly know such a thing, to which Kyle had claimed that he had studied similar arcane topics, because a true mage requires a basic understanding of not only magic, but also the nature of aura. But the hilarious truth is, our hero learned all of this after countless hours playing his favorite game. Kyle had then further stated that Leon Hart had been in desperate need of a new sword for quite some time now. Since he was constantly occupied with his guard duties, he never had the opportunity to acquire a new one for himself. And so, Kyle had always felt a sense of guilt over this. But now that Leon Hart possessed a worthy new blade, he felt a great sense of relief. Leon Hart had been rendered completely speechless and quickly assured Lord Kyle that even if what he said was true, he shouldn't feel guilty on his account. But Kyle had won over Leon Hart's heart even further when he flashed a genuine smile and expressed just how deeply he cared for his loyal knight. Those simple, heartfelt words, my friends, as he had never heard anything so sincere from a Marquis before in his life. Back in the present, Leon Hart reflects on how Marquis Rempton has many devoted aides who have stood by his side since the days of his youth. Leon Hart has always felt like something of an outsider, knowing he could never truly find his place among their ranks. Whether it was a matter of skill level or his bond with the Marquis, he felt he possessed nothing that could compare to those around him. But that's when his wise father cleared the confusion from his heart, encouraging him to simply do whatever his heart desired. And if he wished to remain with Lord Kyle, then he should do so without hesitation. His father reminded him it was the same when he had first joined the prestigious Knights Academy. Although they belonged to a minor baron family, they were truly nobles only in name. The family's financial circumstances were dire back then, and they didn't have the luxury of hiring a proper swordsmanship instructor for him. However, when Leon Hart turned 15, he took the Academy's entrance exam on his own. He passed it with flying colors and became a celebrated knight. His father reminds him that the answer he seeks is already in his heart. He just hasn't yet found the courage to speak it aloud. He tells Leon Hart to be confident in whatever decision he makes, assuring him that the Marquis would undoubtedly understand the reasons behind his choice. Then, his father asks if he is the only knight the Marquis possesses. Leon Hart replies that there is no simple answer to such a question, but he does agree that for Lord Kyle, he is the one and only knight that he has. Just as they are chatting away, they hook a massive fish, and it seems they're going to have a fantastic catch for dinner. After all, meanwhile, Back at the mansion, the first thing we see is Adolf's utterly shocked face when he learns that the great Abel came to recruit Kyle. He furiously tosses aside the book he was holding and demands to know if Kyle agreed to the offer, to which Kyle positively reassures him, saying that if that were truly the case, he would not have come here to report this news to him. Kyle feels a deep sense of annoyance at how Adolf tossed the book aside, but he wisely chooses not to express his disapproval out loud. Instead, he calmly responds to his brother's intense question, explaining that he was just as surprised as he was when brother Abel had suddenly approached him and invited him to join his faction. He admits that given their large age gap, brother Abel had never once spoken to him before in his life, so the encounter was a little bit intimidating. Adolf then responds with a cold and deeply annoyed tone, saying, "There is no way Abel would ever approach him without some ulterior motive." He goes on, claiming that Abel has always been that way, and he never makes a move unless there is a clear benefit involved. He is certain that Abel must have noticed Kyle learning magic, which is why he is now pretending to be a caring older brother. Adolf reminds Kyle that during the entire time he was deathly ill, Abel had never once come to check on his well-being. As Adolf continues, desperately trying to persuade Kyle by highlighting Abel's awful character, our poor hero is left completely speechless, not sure what to say. After losing one of his greatest pawns, the late Baron Jerome, losing another capable person would be a great shame, and so he cannot afford to lose Kyle to the likes of Abel. Even though Kyle is currently just a one-circle mage, Adolf can see an immense, untapped potential within him. Kyle, meanwhile, smiles inwardly at the hypocrisy. He notes how Adolf criticizes Abel for not visiting him, while he was sick when the very same accusation could be leveled at Adolf, who also never once came to check on his well-being. Kyle reflects on the fact that both of his ambitious brothers only ever seem to approach him when they need something from him, but he realizes that he himself is guilty of the very same thing, especially since his ultimate goal is to defeat the Dark Immortal, who threatens the safety of the entire continent. For that monumental task, the power of the renowned swordsmanship of Keltari is an absolutely necessary asset for his plans. However, for the very survival of their noble family, it is Adolf who should be the one to take the eventual fall. Adolf mentions that Abel has been acting quite suspiciously as of late, noting the rumors that he has acquired a massive amount of grain from Enfield. It is truly puzzling, and he cannot possibly figure out why Abel would need such large quantities. Kyle adds that he, too, bought grain for his own magical research. He suggests there is a distinct possibility that Abel might also be attempting to study magic just like him, but Adolf swiftly reminds him that Abel does not possess a magic circle. We can tell that Kyle is simply bluffing about this whole magic learning thing, but it seems that Adolf has completely bought the lie, and he now believes that Kyle simply doesn't realize that Abel does not possess a magic circle. Kyle continues to play along with the charade, apologizing and claiming he doesn't know much about Abel anyway. Adolf then grabs the book that Kyle had tossed aside earlier and tells his brother that they both need to grow even stronger in the future. He asks Kyle to help his big brother grow up much more quickly. Kyle grins widely as he takes the book and readily agrees, saying he will definitely help his ambitious big brother. And with that, he decides to take his leave for now. Meanwhile, just outside the closed door, we see the faithful Ursil standing guard, and just as she is waiting, the traitorous Daisy arrives and immediately begins explaining herself. She tells Ursil that her entire family has been taken hostage by the cruel Adolf, and if she does not do exactly as he says, he will stop at nothing to achieve his terrible goals. And so, she felt she had absolutely no choice but to comply. But Ursil flatly tells her to never show her face in front of Lord Kyle again. Daisy grows impatient, her face twisting into a mask of annoyance, as she reminds Ursil that since she no longer has any family of her own, she doesn't have to worry about such things either. Which explains why Ursil cannot possibly understand her terrible predicament. Ursil stands her ground and does not let Daisy's venomous words sway her, while Daisy storms off after dropping those brutal verbal bombs. Right at that moment, Ursil's familiar spirit arrives, after sensing the deep emotional turmoil she is feeling inside. Since her pet is so closely tied to her own emotions, the little familiar desperately tries to cheer her up, but Ursil reassures her pet that she isn't offended by anything Daisy said, as long as she has the kind Lord Kyle by her side. She does not feel alone in this world at all. The little furball asks her about her own family, and Ursil replies that they are incredibly hard to find, and she doesn't even know if they are still alive. Besides, she doesn't want to cause any more trouble for Lord Kyle. She knows what happens to the women who are sold into slavery. And if she had not met Kyle back on that fateful day, she might not be here to see this very day. So she is now determined to become even stronger for Lord Kyle, the one who ultimately saved her. The next scene takes us to the training grounds, where Kyle can be seen working his formidable magic mojo. With brilliant flames dancing over the palms of his hands, he unleashes a devastating attack known as the fire arrow. The fire blast is powerful enough to completely scatter the target into bits and pieces. Well, this was only made possible because Kyle has finally achieved 100% proficiency with his powerful fire arrow spell, which is a second circle magic. It's like hitting the jackpot. Not only did he learn the fire arrow spell, but he has also completely mastered how to use second circle magic. Ursil and her little fur ball are incredibly glad about the amazing progress Kyle has made with all the rigorous and painful training he has been enduring. So she thinks he is at least entitled to a little bit of rest now. But he catches her completely off guard when he reveals that he still has some important business to take care of. His next move is to visit a notorious place called Prena's to recruit a new and powerful talent he has in mind. When his loyal knight finds out where Kyle plans to go next, he responds with a rather dismissive tone. It seems that Kyle is unsure why Leon Hart is so vehemently against visiting Prena's. Well, this only serves to make Leon Hart even more annoyed, thinking his master is just being intentionally obtuse about the dangerous situation with the city of Prena's. But it looks like Kyle actually knows exactly what's up. Apparently, Prena's is a wretched city of desires and illicit pleasures. Drinking, auctions, gambling, prostitution. These are the main pillars that run the city's dark economy. If you are a spoiled adult with a great deal of money and a host of unethical desires you wish to satisfy, then it is basically a paradise created for those people. But for someone like Kyle, who is still considered a minor, it is a place that is strictly forbidden if he starts chasing holes to mine. Furthermore, the reason Leon Hart is so dead set against his master visiting that wretched place is because he has not forgotten what happened the last time. The last time the original Kyle went there, he gambled in a high-stakes casino and lost everything he had. Quite literally. He even lost the clothes off his back. Hell, he was almost sold to the local slave market. That is how balls deep he was in that terrible mess. But after that incident, Kyle reflected on the irrationality of his past actions, and he had made a solemn vow to never visit that place again. Some guys in the comment section were saying that I was roasting the OG Kyle unnecessarily because he is supposed to be the traumatized victim. Like, bro, just because you're about to die from a terminal illness, that doesn't give you the right to act like a spoiled little brat for no apparent reason. Now, explain to me why it was so damn necessary for him to gamble his very life away at a place that was totally forbidden to minors. Like him, even our hero shares the exact same thoughts. Those terrible blunders the original Kyle made still haunt him to this very day. So he desperately tries to convince his knight that he is not going to indulge in any of those illicit desires. Rather, he has a quick errand to run at the Grand Arena. But of course, given Kyle's disastrous track record, it is only natural for Leon Hart to get the completely wrong idea and assume that our hero is just visiting so he can bet on the gladiators. As far as Leon Hart is concerned, the arena is an even worse place. I'm really sorry, but he makes it clear he will not let Kyle ruin the reputation that he has so carefully built over these past few months. So he sternly suggests that Kyle remains within the mansion walls. And with those final words, he leaves the room, leaving our poor hero grumbling and expressing how badly he wants to get to Prena's somehow. Let's not forget about poor Ursil, who has a totally different reaction when she finally finds out what kind of place Prena's really is. If anything, she now seems incredibly jealous and mad at Kyle for even thinking of exploring other holes, instead of making her his one and only real goal. Seeing her incredibly sour reaction, Kyle can do nothing but slump even further into his chair. Initially, he only had the stubborn Leon Hart to deal with, but now, Ursil seems to be another person he has to somehow convince. With barely any time left on his hands, he has no clue how to convince them both quickly. After all, this is the one and only chance he has to track down his target, a formidable man by the name of Saren. Let's get some context on who this guy actually is. Apparently, Saren is a plausible protagonist-level character from fantasy, defense, and being the main character, he possesses decent base stats and the potential to rise even further. His default starting class is Swordsman, and he can advance into many other skill trees. But if you were to focus all of his learning potential on the path of the Swordsman, he can become a veritable powerhouse, unmatched anywhere on this entire continent. Since Saren is a man born to achieve greatness, recruiting him as soon as humanly possible is the best option. He could become an irreplaceable ally in subduing the dread Dark Immortal. As for where Saren is right now, He is trapped within the Prina's underground arena. Promptly, the scene cuts to the bloody underground arena in question. The gladiators who are fated to fight have now started to emerge. With the brutal battles about to begin, the audience goes completely bonkers, as they can finally make their expensive tickets worth the price. The unfortunate gladiators seem to be chickening out, because they are about to face the undefeated champion of the Prina's arena. The lore. The living legend of the underground world who goes by the title of Sword Demon. This boy has an uncanny and deeply unsettling presence about it. He is scrawny and exudes a gloomy and deeply melancholic vibe. Even the men watching the so-called Sword Demon for the very first time are disappointed by the scrawny, pathetic warrior standing before them. They find it utterly laughable that this kid was even qualified to enter the gladiator arena, let alone fight against 3 grown men at once. Then, one man reveals an interesting tidbit of information. While the kid may look scrawny and weak, he has climbed this far with just that single sword he is currently holding, making him a true force to be reckoned with. Another man assures his concerned friend not to be fooled by the young kid's unassuming appearance. After all, he has come this far wielding only that one sword, which explains just how terrifying he must truly be. Rumor has it that his entire personality changes the moment he grabs his sword. And just as the rumors foretold, Bro goes completely berserk and lunges at the 3 poor bastards who are cowering for their very lives. They literally scatter as the terrifying Sword Demon chases them down. He looks like a bloodthirsty fiend, wanting to devour his enemies alive. He finally catches one poor soul and slays him on the spot, with fresh blood splattering everywhere. The other 2 lambs can only pray for a swift miracle. The Sword Demon then turns his cold attention to the other 2, who had already lost their will to fight, even before the match had officially started. Predictably, these 2 poor bastards meet the same bloody fate as their fallen friend. I feel truly bad for these guys. They literally died for absolutely no reason. But it seems that this horrific bloodshed was not entirely unnecessary, because the violence-loving, war-craving audience is absolutely loving it. They had expected nothing less from the legendary Sword Demon. It is always one decisive victory after another. The matches themselves might seem predictable, but the brutal way the Sword Demon slaughters his enemies makes it damn entertaining to watch. Meanwhile, the Sword Demon craves more violence and wants to spill even more blood. There is a dark lust for blood that is taking over his head, urging him to shed it all. But he suddenly snaps out of his frenzy, coughing violently and losing his tight grip on his sword. A short while later, he can be seen caged and confined with heavy shackles over his hands. He is breathing heavily, and yet he cannot seem to catch his breath. With all the agonizing pain that is coursing through his body, the guards watching over him notice him squirming in agony, making them afraid that this valuable kid might actually die. The other guard decides to just leave him completely alone. The reason this boy is in so much pain is that he hasn't fully recovered yet. So even the simple act of moving around hurts him. But once he has finally healed, he should be fine. It's kind of morbid to think that out of all the people here, this young, scrawny kid is the infamous Sword Demon. Seriously. These guards are forced to ponder where they even manage to find someone like him. Rumor has it that he has been wandering from arena to arena as a young kid with no place to truly call his home. No one knows for sure if his parents died or simply abandoned him. The kid himself can barely even remember his own given name. One of the guards is surprised that a wild beast like this even possesses a name when he asks what the so-called Sword Demon's name is. The scene dramatically shifts back to our hero, who states that his name is Saron. He is 13, but in the dark city of Prinas, he is known only as the Sword Demon. He is explaining all of this to the captivated Ursil, desperately trying to convince her to let him go to Prinas. Soren could be a monumental asset for Kyle if he can manage to recruit him, so he wants to get him on his side before he leaves the bloody arena. With Soren, that would mark the 4th member of Kyle's grand talent acquisition project. The scene shifts once more to the dining area, where a lavish spread of food has been laid out, while Leon Hart is busy digging in. Our scheming duo anxiously waits for him to consume the food, into which they have slipped a powerful sleeping potion. They have made absolutely sure the night will be knocked out cold when they make their escape and sneak out tonight. Seeing Leon Hart finally gulp down the drugged food relaxes them a little bit. It is now the dead of night, and Kyle and Ursil sneak quietly through the darkened mansion, careful not to draw any unwanted attention as they step outside. The carriages are already waiting out front, and with Leon Hart supposedly fast asleep, all they have to do now is leave the mansion grounds. Now that Kyle thinks about it, there is no real need to sneak around like thieves since Leon Hart is not around. But then, appearing out of nowhere, the said Leon Hart is literally standing right behind them. He has already caught on to their plan. Hell, he even knows that the food he ate was drugged. Kyle is freaking out, seeing his knight wide awake. But we all know that a simple sleeping potion is not enough to take down Leon Hart. By now, Kyle is forced to finally admit that he had severely underestimated this high-ranking expert knight. He had made that powerful sleeping drug himself, and he had even infused it with magic to make it even more potent. But seeing his knight survive that stuff just goes to show how resilient this man actually is. Back on track, Leon Hart expresses his deep disappointment that his master had planned all of this behind his back. He is even more disappointed in Ursil for tagging along on this dangerous trip to Preenus. But before he can throw any more shade and scold the poor girl further, Kyle stops him, clarifying that Ursil did absolutely nothing wrong, as he was the one who had convinced her to come along. So it is not her fault, and Leon Hart should not be scolding her. The concerned knight sighs heavily, mildly dejected, and reveals the true reason he is so against this trip. Apparently, the city of Preenus' security has gotten much worse since Kyle's last visit. In fact, the city is now the continent's most wretched den of vice. It is especially not a place for a young lady like Ursil. Going there now is just plain reckless. Of course, Kyle is more than capable of protecting both Ursil and himself. He is capable enough to blow up the entire city if he really needs to, but Leon Hart isn't so sure that Kyle really wants to attract that much unnecessary attention. Like that. Hearing this, my guy cracks a faint, wicked smile because, yeah, he does indeed want to cause a huge mess in that wretched city. Though he isn't entirely sure if he can do it all by himself. If he has to be truly honest, his real, ultimate goal is to completely destroy Preenus' gladiator arena. He wants to free the gladiator slaves who are trapped in the underground cells. That is his one and only motivation for going back to Preenus. But to successfully pull it off, he needs Leon Hart standing by his side. His decision to go to Preenus might seem sudden and reckless, but he has been planning to liberate the slaves for a very long time. It bothers him endlessly to think about kids who are his own age suffering in such a way. That is why he desperately wants Leon Hart to join him in this noble cause and to help him see it through. Of course, the duty-bound knight cannot help but feel a huge surge of admiration for his young master. Being righteous is Leon Hart's single greatest weakness, and that is precisely what Kyle is playing on right now. Since bro, he is already planning to recruit the legendary Sarone. Saying that he wants to free the slaves is not exactly a lie either. A few days later, we find ourselves back in a high-stakes gambling arena, where Kyle is winning one bet after another, like it is absolutely nobody's business. With all the games that he has won, he has already amassed a huge ton of chips. He is truly having the time of his life, winning every single game, one after the other. Even the dealers have been switched out 3 separate times, but Kyle still remains completely undefeated, thanks to his raw, god-tier talent. The reason they are here is due to the fact that they were not allowed to go directly to the underground gladiator arena. So first, they had to make a stop at the casino. But in the casino, Leon Hart forbade Ursil from tagging along with them. So now, Kyle waits inside the casino, biding his time for the perfect opportunity to sneak into the arena. And just as Kyle had expected, a fat opportunity literally waddles its way into the casino. This fat cat's name is Riddle Remington, the gluttonous lord of Preenus and the son of Viscount Remington. After hearing about Kyle's incredible winning streak, this fat cat suggests they go all in and bet the absolute highest amount. But my guy pretends that he has lost all interest in simple card games and now wants to bet on something far more thrilling. Something with bloodshed, screams, and a whole lot of agonizing pain. Everyone knows there is only one place like that in this city. And so, the fat cat suggests that Kyle should follow him. As they head out, Kyle instructs his knight to claim all of their winnings before they finally leave the casino. Meanwhile, Riddler's butler worries about his master risking absolutely everything. But Riddler is already supremely confident about the bets he is about to make. First, he will let Kyle win a few rounds, just to make him feel like he is in control. And only then will he finally plan to make his opponent lose it all. In the end, it seems that Riddle already knows a great deal about our boy. He has heard the recent rumors that Kyle has matured, but seeing him betting so recklessly like this, Riddle is now sure that he is still the same old brat as ever. We flash back to a time when Riddle was busy preparing and keeping company with his equally gluttonous father. His father, the Viscount Remington, and the Lord of Preenus, had warned him that Kyle was coming, though the true reason for his visit was a complete mystery. The son was certain that Kyle was just back to gamble, like he always did. He assured his concerned father that he would take care of that little prick without even breaking a sweat. The rumors of Kyle's supposed change were nothing more than rumors. He was born a troublemaker, and people simply do not change overnight. The most likely scenario is that he just got bored of playing nice back at home and couldn't resist the urge to go out. With that in his mind, He assured his equally fat father that he would take care of Kyle first. He would let our hero win a few games just to get him completely hooked. Then he would strip him of everything that he owned, including his precious dignity. Back to the present. Riddle strategizes as they finally arrive at their dark destination. Before they enter, he turns and reveals that not everyone is allowed inside. Only Kyle is privileged enough to be able to enter the notorious underground gladiator arena. He further assures him that what our hero is about to witness will be worth it. Well, my guy is more than ready for the surprises that lie ahead. Well, he says that, he really means it. Both of these boys are actually thinking of surprising each other.